first one was submitted by viewer Trent Leons, and when this was recorded, he and his family had recently moved into his grandparents' house. The house is in the middle of nowhere, so the family naturally had their guard down. However, one night at 1 in the morning, while most of the family was asleep, Trent got a notification for a ring that there was motion at the front door. A notification for movement wasn't a concern as the family has outdoor cats that are active at night, but there was definitely reason for concern when it said somebody is at your front door. One of the family members grabbed a gun and went to open the front door, and that's where he started to raise his hands and started asking for help.
Help? Can I use a phone to call a cab?
He asked to use a phone, to which the family gave him a cell phone, and with it he tried calling someone, but to no avail.
No problems, man. You know me? Yep.
He then proceeded to start walking off down the road. As the guy was walking down the road, two of the family members decided to hop in their truck and find out where he was going, and they found him walking down the road and looking like he was going to another house down the road, the nearest one being half a mile away. The two family members decided they didn't want him near their house or any neighboring houses, so they offered he get in the bed of the truck and they drive him into town, and about a couple minutes later, they arrived in town and dropped him off. The whole time he had his hands up and kept looking at the two family members while he backed away from the truck. It could have been assumed that the man was genuinely looking for help and needed to call someone, if it weren't for the fact that other family members reported that the week prior, he was in another neighborhood around the area, allegedly asking for help again, in late hours of the night, going from door to door in dimly lit areas. It's quite possible that he may have been trying to maliciously gain entry into the homes of sympathetic or unsuspecting people. It's unknown if that's the case or if he was ever successful. This one was posted by a Redditor named T Course, and there aren't as many details on this one, other than it happened in a small suburb late on a rainy night. This was way past solicitation or visiting hours. The homeowner wasn't home at the time and saw the notification the next day, which is when they saw this video footage. From the darkness appears a middle-aged woman with an umbrella, with her mouth gaping wide open. She stands there for about 20 seconds after ringing the bell, the whole time with her mouth hanging eerily wide open, aside from closing it for a couple seconds, showing that her mouth didn't appear to be stuck in this hanging open position. She tries the doorbell or another button one more time before walking away and disappearing into the darkness seconds later. The homeowner says he didn't recognize this woman at all. Some people believe it was some kind of condition the woman was suffering. Whether it was or not, this wouldn't explain why she was ringing a stranger's doorbell in the late hours of the night. Perhaps another encounter that a homeowner was lucky to avoid. This footage was captured as a homeowner was entering her house after just getting home. The woman lives in a suburban town in Illinois.
Como pra fora. Oh, don't move. Don't stare. Don't. Okay.
The woman in the video was unaware of the fact that she was being watched from the distance by two people hiding in the dark, waiting for her to open her front door. As she steps into her house, the two aggressors take their chance to enter the house while the door is still open. The woman screams as she's startled by the unwelcomed visitor behind her. The first of the two teens to enter the house says don't move and don't scream.
Como pra fora. Oh, don't move. Don't stare. Don't.
The rest of what is said between he and the woman is inaudible. However, according to the woman in the video, he demanded her car keys. After handing him her keys, which can be seen in one of the teenager's hands, the two take off towards her car, which they then steal. There was someone else in the house with the woman who was also held at gunpoint alongside her. He also remains nameless. The woman wasn't harmed, thankfully, and one of the two teenage aggressors were found and arrested, 18-year-old Brendan McCrew. The other aggressor has still yet to be identified. This video is a prime example of why you should always be aware of your surroundings before opening your front door. This past July in 2021, this disturbing footage caught on a couple's Ring doorbell camera surfaced on the web. In the footage, a tattooed man with a long gray beard holding a plastic bag, apparently talking to himself, approached the front door of the couple's house. The man in the video apparently spotted the unnamed wife inside of the house through the kitchen window. He approached the front door, where he repeatedly started saying, "Are you sure? Are you positive? I just have a few questions for you."
Are you sure? I just rang your doorbell because I have a couple questions for you. Are you sure? I just rang your doorbell because I have a couple questions for you. Are you sure? What? Are you sure? I just rang your doorbell because I have a couple questions for you. Are you sure? Are you positive? Are you sure? I just have a couple questions for you. Are you sure? Are you positive? I just have a couple questions for you. Are you sure? Are you positive? Are you sure? Are you absolutely certain?
The wife said she never responded to the man. She simply hid in her home and called 911. The man was standing there knocking on the glass, repeating the same three things over and over to nobody. Her husband, who was not at the home at the time, accessed the intercom system and asked the man who he was as he was walking away. This caused him to come back, look into the camera, and start saying some pretty nasty, disturbing things.
So who are you?
What? Yeah? Are you sure?
Who are you?
Hey, I just had a couple questions. I just wanted to ask you about TV show. Yeah, can you hear me? What I'm looking for is for the girl that's in the house to come out here because I'm going to rape her and kill her. Can you have her open the door? I'm going to rape and kill the girl that's on the other side of this door when she lets me in. I want to rape her and kill her because I have a knife and a gun. Yeah, and I'm going to knock on her door again. All right.
He was saying he wished to rape and kill her and asked if she could open the door multiple times. After one more unsuccessful knock, the man walked away, talking to himself in different voices as he did. Police found and arrested the man the next day after another report of a suspicious man in the area, and he was identified as 40-year-old Christopher Sums, a fugitive from California. This footage was captured in Bristol and shows a man approach and knock on Kathleen Frascarelli's door. That in of itself isn't so disturbing, but it's the fact that it was very late on a Sunday night, and the image she saw on her phone was of a masked person on the other side of the door. However, the fact that it was late on a Sunday night, and that the image she saw on the phone was of a masked person on the other side of the door, is enough to give someone pause. While playing back the video footage, Kathleen the homeowner noticed that the masked person tried opening the door at first, but thankfully it was locked. She described the mask as having this grotesque smile that never went away, and still hasn't gone away from her memory. The person knocks and then stands at the door for 15 seconds. Afterwards, the camera catches them pulling their sleeve over their hand, then wiping away their fingerprints for the doorknob they tried to open when they first walked up to the house. The fact that they wiped away their fingerprints already says that they were up to no good, if everything else about this didn't already scream that. Kathleen stated that he had something heavy in his sweatshirt pocket, which he doesn't know what it was. A neighbor who saw the person leaving said he had a bag that he was carrying with him, so God knows what was in there. By the time Kathleen made it downstairs, the person was already in a car parked across the street, which they sped off in. Footage like this is really the scariest because nobody knows how these encounters would have gone down if the doors were opened. Home security technology has come a long way. Doorbell cameras such as Ring have become extremely popular in recent years, acting as an effective deterrent from potential robbers or any other kind of unwelcomed guests. Their ability to record video whenever someone comes within range to the front of a house or any other section of the house that they're installed in creates an added level of security to a person's home. With the millions of Ring doorbell cameras installed throughout America has come a lot of creepy footage, including the following. This first piece of footage was captured by the Ring camera in the LeMay household. It happened on a cold December night in 2019. A stranger hacked into the LeMay family's Ring security system and had watched them around their home, and for nearly 10 minutes, he interacted with 8-year-old Alyssa. Not only was he able to watch her, but he was able to communicate noises to her, as he had access to a second system placed in the girl's babysitter's room downstairs. Alyssa then heard music coming from upstairs in her bedroom, which she shared with her. Actually realized someone was watching her in the bedroom because the blue light from the Ring camera was blinking. Then, in a strange man's voice, she heard this.
Hello there.
The 8-year-old gasped and tried to figure out where the voice was coming from. She would pick up her toys to see if they were what was making the noises. She scanned the room, and moments later, the man started screaming a racial slur at her over and over until Alyssa responded by screaming this. The man proceeded to tell her to go call her mom the racial slur and demand that she repeat it back to him. Moments later, the voice would reply to Alyssa asking who are you by saying he's her best friend, he's Santa Claus.
Who is that?
I'm your best friend. I'm Santa Claus.
Mommy!
I'm Santa Claus. Don't you want to be my best friend? I'm Santa Claus.
After all of this, the man tries to tell the girl she can do whatever she wants, including break things in her room.
I'm your best friend. You can do whatever you want right now. You can mess up your room. You can break your TV. You can do whatever you want.
The LeMay family, who resides in Memphis, Tennessee, hoped to use the device to keep an eye on their daughters while they played. The scary thing is that it took only a few days for the camera to be hacked. Perhaps the scariest thing is that no one knows how long he had access to the device. This could have gone on even longer if the hacker decided not to produce any sounds through the device. Put yourself in the little girl's shoes. Imagine hearing a creepy song playing in your bedroom, not knowing where it's coming from, only to realize that it's coming from a camera system that you set up in there, and that someone could be watching you. Now imagine waking up to that in the middle of the night. In another similar scenario, Here's the footage from a Ring camera that was also taken over by a hacker who attempted to speak to a young girl while she was watching television.
What you watching? Hey, what show is that?
The father and homeowner, Adam Kerselik, had set up the Ring camera in his kitchen. In the footage, a voice can be heard speaking to his daughter after he momentarily leaves the room.
I've seen that show before. What season you on? Hello?
When Adam re-enters the room and opens the fridge, the voice says, "What are you eating?"
Hello? What are you eating? You hungry?
What?
He looks around at first, rightfully confused as to where the voice could be coming from, though he eventually catches on and approaches the camera as he asks, "Who is this?"
Powering off. Hello. This is Ring.
Who is this? Who is this?
Adam disabled the camera shortly after the video ends, and he expressed his disappointment in Amazon's lack of security on their products. He said he was never advised to set up two-factor verification when he installed the camera 6 months prior. Because of the lack of security on the Ring devices, he has since taken down all his interior cameras. This and the Lemoy family's horror stories aren't the only ones of their kind though, as since 2019, over 10 other families in different states had reported that hackers have spoken to them through the devices. On November 12, 2019, the disturbing footage of a woman screaming for help was captured from a Ring doorbell's camera in a small neighborhood of Los Angeles around 11 p.m. The screaming is followed by a white vehicle speeding down the street with the trunk open, from which the screaming is coming from. Police were not aware of the doorbell footage until the following morning, but on the night of November 12th, they responded to a report of a possible kidnapping. Police couldn't find any evidence of a kidnapping at first. However, after the footage came to light, the LAPD reopened their investigation. A witness claimed she also heard a man say, "I'm sorry," which you can hear in the video at one point. The sad thing is, this was 2 years ago, and nothing ever surfaced with this. If this was an actual kidnapping, the kidnappee was never found. This was the footage captured around 3 a.m. on a man's Ring camera. Not much more information than that was shared. However, multiple conclusions can be drawn from what's seen. It starts with a masked woman seemingly trying to enter the man's house, until she notices the doorbell camera, at which point she stares into the camera for almost 40 seconds. Halfway into her disturbing gaze into the camera, she puts on a pair of goggle-type glasses and pulls the mask covering her mouth and nose up higher onto her face, clearly trying to mask her identity as much as possible. Before she walks away, she makes several hand gestures into the camera, then turns and appears to grab something from behind one of the walls of the house. As she slowly walks away from the house, you might assume she's leaving for good. However, you can see she continues to pace back and forth in front of the house until the video hits the 2-minute mark, at which point the doorbell camera is set to stop recording. After the video ends, however, according to neighbors, the woman was seen standing outside the house for at least another 20 to 30 minutes before finally disappearing. It's not known who this woman was, whether it be a crazy stalker ex-girlfriend or someone completely random. This begs the question, what could she have wanted with the owner of the house? but given everything the woman was wearing from head to toe, it's obvious she came to that house with intentions of masking her identity. Why is a question that may never be answered. And with this last one, we see a scene that seems like it was taken straight from one of the hundreds of stories I've read on the channel. Once again, at some off hour in the night, a woman approached the front door of a Reddit user's dad's friend's house somewhere on the east coast of the United States. The woman seems to have a slight smile on her face at first, as she looks around the front door of the house all confused like. She stands there for 2 full minutes at least, acting nervous and confused, looking behind her several times in a paranoid manner. But what is most concerning about this unexpected visit was the large kitchen knife in her hand that she looks down at several times in the footage. While the generally accepted theory on this was that the woman has some form of dementia, and while this may be a realistic explanation, this cannot be 100% confirmed simply based on the video. While it is unfortunate if she does in fact have dementia or any other sort of illness that caused her to do this, it would still be hard to imagine just how scary this would be for the owner of the house waking up in the middle of the night to this footage from his doorbell camera. Surveillance cameras in general have come a long way in providing security to people's properties. While Ring doorbell cameras continue to prove to be useful in adding a layer of defense or serving as a mental deterrent to uninvited guests, you clearly have to be cautious about setting up these cameras on the inside of your house because of the potential for hackers to gain access to them, as seen in the first 2 examples in this video. These are 6 of some of the creepiest and most disturbing science experiments throughout human history. Number 6. The concept has become almost a staple in science fiction: mind control. However, what if it's not as fictional as you may have thought? Scientists at the University of California were able to develop cyborg beetles by implanting electronic components into the beetles' cocoons. The insects could then actually be controlled via a remote control and instructed how and where to fly, almost like an RC helicopter. The experiment was then pushed a stage further when the military started to experiment on rats and implemented heat sensors and small cameras onto the tiny creatures. The military's main goal with this is to create a means of conducting safer search and rescue missions or for surveillance using the rats and beetles. Essentially, the scientists turn neurons in the rats' brains on and off using different colors of light. The really creepy part is that scientists believe this opens up the possibility for potential human mind control in the near future. Number 5. For decades, the Soviet Union actually created and maintained a secret lab known as the Chamber, Laboratory 1, and Laboratory 12, which led a sinister program to devise new methods of poisoning people. Beginning in 1921 and continuing for most of the 21st century, the chamber was used as a covert research facility for secret police agencies. Prisoners from Russian labor camps, or gulags, were exposed to a number of deadly poisons in the chamber, including mustard gas, ricin, digitoxin, and more. The purpose of which was to find a tasteless, odorless chemical that could not be detected in a dead body. Men and women of varying ages and physical conditions were brought to the laboratories, where they were given the poisons which would be mixed into a meal or drink, or served as a medication. Eventually, a preparation with the scientist's desired properties was developed, and it was called C2. C2 was not detectable post-mortem, and according to witness testimonies, a victim who was given C2 changed physically, becoming shorter and weaker, and after falling silent and calm, died within only 15 minutes. People of varied physical conditions and ages were brought to the labs in order to have a more complete picture for the action of each poison. In addition to human experimentation, the scientists would also execute every prisoner brought down to the lab who survived the poisonous effects. Number 4. The Stanford Prison Experiments. Conducted at Stanford University on the morning of August 17, 1971, a group of young men in the Palo Alto area received visits from local police officers and were arrested for armed robbery and burglary. Their neighbors watched on as the young men were searched, handcuffed, and forced into the back of the police cars, not realizing that it was all part of a prearranged setup. The students were taken to a Palo Alto police station where they were booked, fingerprinted, moved to a holding cell, and blindfolded. Finally, they were transported to the Stanford University Psychology Department, or as it was referred to for the experiments, the Stanford County Prison. The point of the experiment was to essentially demonstrate how authority and power dynamics affect a human being's capacity for evil. 24 male students of Stanford University were chosen and randomly assigned roles of either prisoners or guards, and the so-called Stanford County Prison was just a mock-designed prison in the basement of the Stanford Psychology building. Those who were assigned as guards began to humiliate and psychologically abuse the assigned prisoners with little to no instruction to even do so. Some of the guards would do pointlessly cruel things to the prisoners, for instance waking them up at off hours of the night and forcing them to do jumping jacks, or threatening them with batons, and much worse. The prisoners in turn became submissive and depersonalized, taking the abuse and saying very little in protest. When prisoners would request to leave the experiments, they would be told this is a real prison environment and they could not leave. A few prisoners started to experience slight mental breakdowns within a few days and were only then allowed to leave the experiments.
God damn it! You're fucked up! You don't know, I mean, God! I mean, Jesus Christ, I'm burning up inside, don't you know? I just fucking can't take it. I feel so fucked up inside, I feel really fucked up inside, you don't know, I gotta go, to a doctor, anything. I can't say that. I'm fucked up. I don't know how to explain it. I'm all fucked up inside. Now!
The behavior of everyone involved became so extreme that the experiment, which was meant to last 2 weeks, was terminated after 6 days. Number 3. For you animal lovers out there, this one may be a little disturbing. In 1940, Russian scientists released a video of their experiments which involved severed dog heads being kept alive for several hours. The severed heads would wiggle their ears in response to sounds and even lick their mouths. The scientists who were behind the experiment claimed they were able to keep the animals alive by attaching an artificial blood circulation system to the head. But that was just the first time that scientists had created these so-called zombie dogs. In 2005, American scientists tried again by flushing all the blood from the dogs' bodies and replacing it with oxygen and sugar-filled saline. 3 hours later, after the team gave the dogs a blood transfusion and an electric shock, the dogs were back from the dead with fully animated severed heads, with one even allegedly regaining consciousness. There's only footage of the 1940 experiment that's available on the internet. If it makes you feel any better, the experiments kind of had good intentions, as this kind of treatment could apparently one day save people from hemorrhaging blood too quickly. Number 2. During the time of the Holocaust, the Nazis decided to perform several experiments on humans, causing the victims to suffer to unbearable degrees, and for the most part, resulted in death. These torturous experiments were done on concentration camp prisoners during World War II, most of whom were Jews. One of the most feared doctors during this time was Josef Mengele, who was also known as the Angel of Death. He lived in the Auschwitz concentration camp, and what he enjoyed most was experimenting with the genetics of twins and people with deformities. He experimented on over 1,000 pairs of twins, with only about 200 surviving the experiments. However, survivors of the experiments didn't live long regardless, as most were killed anyway. The Nazis wanted to know if a person's joints and limbs could be removed and transplanted into someone else. These cruel experiments led to scores of concentration camp prisoners having limbs needlessly amputated. The aim was to study the regeneration of bones, muscles, and nerves. Every attempt to transplant a limb or joint was a failure. Many were killed, mutilated, and exposed to excruciating pain. Sections of muscle, bone, and nerves were also removed in fruitless attempts to regenerate those body parts. Other horrific Nazi experiments also consisted of forcing victims to drink seawater in hopes that they would find a way to make seawater drinkable, but failed every single time. Scientists forced victims to drink only seawater and deprived them of all food and fresh water. The experiment became so unbearable that some victims actually licked a freshly mopped floor just to get a small amount of fresh water. Number 1. There have been many reports of North Korean human experimentation of prisoners in gas chambers, testing deadly chemical weapons, and surgery without anesthesia. These reports show human rights abuses similar to those of Nazi and Japanese human experimentation in World War II. The North Korean government of course denies these allegations and claims that all prisoners in North Korea are humanely treated. One former North Korean female prisoner shared what she witnessed, claiming 50 healthy women prisoners were selected and given poisoned cabbage leaves, which all the women were forced to eat despite cries of distress from those who had already eaten them. According to the woman, all 50 were dead after 20 minutes of vomiting blood. Now all 50 women ate the leaf, as refusing to do so would have meant that they and their families would be severely punished. Kwon Hyuk, who was a former prison head of security at Camp 22, described laboratories equipped respectively for poison gas, suffocation gas, and blood experiments in which 3 or 4 people, sometimes families, are the experimental subjects. After undergoing medical checks, the chambers are sealed and the poison is injected through a tube, while scientists observe from the outside. Kwon even stated, "I saw an entire family being killed. They were put in the gas chamber where they all suffocated. The last to die was the youngest son." Kwon stated the parents tried to save the children using mouth-to-mouth resuscitation for as long as they had the strength, and that it was the most horrific and evil thing he had ever seen. With police being in the front lines of investigating everything out of the ordinary, it's no surprise they'll come across some disturbing things. Some of the findings on this list are weird, some shocking, and some just disturbing. So, here are 6 disturbing police discoveries. Number 6. In Glen Rose, Texas, neighbors of Tasha Chantel Hatcher noticed her acting odd and immediately notified police. And it's a good thing they did, as the police found something completely unexpected and horrifying inside of her oven. Now, Tasha and her neighbors lived in a relatively peaceful area. However, one day when some of Tasha's neighbors noticed her acting a bit nervous and blasting music, they knew something was wrong and thought it would be best to get the police to investigate her house. Tasha is a single mother of a 2-year-old girl named Nevaeh. Tasha always seemed like a playful and caring mother, which made this whole situation just more shocking. When the cops arrived, they found Tasha's daughter inside of the oven, which had been turned on. Tasha admitted to willfully doing this, and as a result of her actions, her daughter suffered 2nd and 3rd degree burns and was hospitalized. She has since been put under foster care. Tasha has been charged with serious bodily harm to a child. She is currently being held on a $300,000 bond. Number 5. In 1969, 3 people riding in a 1950 Chevy were reported missing and were never found. Only a year later, 3 teenagers riding in a 1969 Camaro were also reported missing. For more than 45 years, their location had remained a mystery until just recently when all 6 of them were found inside both cars at the bottom of Foss Lake in Oklahoma. Jimmy Williams, Lee Johnson, and Michael Rios went missing while on their way to a football game. This was on November 20th, 1970. The Camaro, belonging to Jimmy Williams, was found at the bottom of Foss Lake by police divers who were actually in the middle of a training exercise. But that wasn't all they found. They also discovered a second car in the lake, which also had 3 bodies inside. The bodies were identified as 69-year-old John Alva Porter, who was the driver, and his friends Nora Duncan and Cleburne Hammock. They had been missing for more than 50 years.
The circumstances of these deaths are still not fully known, but the police believe foul play to be the most logical explanation. It's believed that it's just too much of a coincidence that 2 nights out so long ago that happened just within a year ended in such an eerily similar fashion. It will likely never be known just what happened all those years ago. Number 4. In December of 2015, Russian officers found 37 unmarked sacks stuffed with sawdust sitting on railway cars. At first glance, the mysterious bags just seemed to contain wood shavings. However, the officers discovered that hidden inside of the bags were hundreds of severed bear parts which smugglers intended to sell on the black market. Police confiscated 527 bear feet, a bear muzzle, bear gallbladders, and 3 musk deer glands. The body parts were destined for Asia, where they would be used for medicine. In fact, Asia is responsible for the poaching of a lot of animals. They hold beliefs that many animal parts, for example ivory and tusks, can cure diseases such as cancer. A disappointing statistic has shown that bears in the past few years have been becoming a much bigger target to poaching. Number 3. During Halloween night of 2015 in Slingerlands, New York, police discovered that 2 Halloween decorations were not what they seemed. Police were cruising Veeder Road in a rather wealthy area when they coincidentally received a call from a resident on the same road telling them that they saw 2 dead body decorations hanging on their front tree. The creepy part was that they didn't hang anything on their front tree. Police arrived within minutes and saw exactly what the woman was talking about, but upon closer inspection, realized these were not decorations at all, but rather 2 real decomposed bodies. The woman recalled 2 men who were suspiciously walking around out front in her house about an hour earlier, though she couldn't give any worthwhile details about the 2 men. It's unknown if these 2 men the woman mentioned were responsible for this, who these dead bodies belonged to, if and why these 2 men killed them, and why they targeted her house. Number 2. In 2014, there was a Reddit post asking people about their scariest experiences as a police officer. A Redditor whose account has since been deleted replied to the post, explaining a situation he and his partner for the night had encountered. There was a call to inspect an air vent at an elderly woman's house, as she suspected there had been an animal or something up there, as a large part of the vent in the living room was caving down as if something were in there. She had just gotten back from a vacation that day with her daughter to find this. It was a slow night and they were the closest to the house, so they were instructed to check it out. Stepping into the house, they could immediately smell a foul odor filling the air in the house, an odor the old woman said she couldn't smell. The old woman showed the officers the specific air vent where she saw the bulge. The vent cover was very large and old-fashioned. It had 4 big screws that kept the cover on. The smell was most unbearable by this vent. The cops knew something was dead inside of there. They undid the screws and shined a light into the vents. They were disturbed not to see a dead raccoon or something they were expecting, but rather a dead person. They had a hard time dragging the body out as it was stuck in the narrow duct, but they were soon able to get him out and identify him. He was a bald black man, mid-40s, wearing an unzipped black hoodie with a stained undershirt underneath, denim jeans, and brown work boots. He had a knife tightly gripped in his stiff fingers, which the cops assumed was meant to harm the old woman. This duct led to an air vent outside, which is how the man was able to break in the first place. The author of the post said that since the man was apparently stuck in the vent for days in the summer heat, he could have died of a certain number of things, most likely of thirst. Number 1. On September 12, 2015, a disturbed 38-year-old Swedish doctor whose name has not been revealed drugged a woman he knew with strawberries he had laced with Rohypnol, raped her, and then drove her across state to imprison her inside an underground bunker he had built on his property. The woman continued to endure rape and physical harm for a few days until September 18th, when the doctor drove her back to her home 350 miles away to collect her belongings. However, the doctor grew nervous when he arrived to the house to discover police had ransacked the place. This made him decide to take her directly to them, to have her inform the authorities that she was okay. Of course, the police knew better and pulled her aside to get the real story out of her. The cops immediately arrested the doctor and searched his home, and what they discovered there proved just how insane this man was. His house contained rubber masks of bearded men and old women, syringes, birth control pills, condoms, the wheelchair he used to carry the woman from her home into his car, and perhaps most disturbingly, wrist and ankle chains attached to the wall. Police speculated by the design of the bunker, with a bathroom and covered courtyard, that the doctor had planned on keeping the woman locked up there for several years. Police also believed that he was planning on doing this for years. He clearly built this bunker for the sole purpose of keeping one or more victims captive. Friends of the doctor were shocked and couldn't believe he would do something like this. He was described as helpful and polite. The exact sentencing for this doctor is unknown, but it's certain he'll be going away for a long time. As a little bonus clip, here's an interesting story. A snorkeler called the emergency services after spotting what he thought were human remains at the bottom of a lake. Police sent someone from their diving team to investigate. He took a camera down there to record the remains, and found two bodies sitting upright in plastic garden chairs and appeared to be having a tea party. One of them held this sign that read, "Bernie living the dream in the river." While the figures looked very real from a distance, upon closer inspection the diver realized that they were plastic fakes planted by scuba divers as a gag. If these were real, this would have made for a pretty horrifying find. Feel free to follow me on Twitter, like me on Facebook, and I will see you in the next one.
I was looking for a car to buy for my son for his 18th birthday. I was searching all the typical car websites, cars.com, eBay Motors. They were all overpriced as expected. Craigslist was the only place to find an actual deal. About a week into my search, I found an 03 Toyota Camry. It had 67,000 miles, no accidents, no damage, and good condition for only $3,500. This seemed like a steal for such a reliable car with such low mileage. The seller lived about 10 miles from me, which was a reasonable drive when looking for a car. I gave him a call to set up a time to come check it out. The man sounded normal on the phone. He assured me there were absolutely no problems with the car. He introduced himself as Bob. I brought along $3,500 in cash, even though I planned on wiggling down the price as much as possible. I pulled up the dirt road to Bob's property about 15 minutes early. It was a tiny little house with a decent-sized property, only because it was a bit far from the nearest neighbors. The garage was open, so I looked over to see if anyone was inside, but except for an unusual amount of car parts, it was empty. The car was nowhere in sight. The only car on the property was an old pickup truck. I went over to the front door to check the house numbers. It was the right address. The doorbell button was missing, so I knocked on the front door. I knocked every once in a while for exactly 5 minutes before deciding to give the man a call. So I dialed his number, and I heard the sound of his phone ringing from inside the house. I was extremely confused at this point. Now I knew I had the right house. I didn't understand why, if he was home, why he wasn't answering. I decided I had to take a peek through one of the windows to see if anyone was inside. Peering through the glass, I couldn't really see much as it was pretty dark inside the house. I saw a very old-fashioned dining room set, but across from that, I saw somebody standing at the back door of the house, staring outside. I figured that must have been Bob, so I knocked on the window, but he didn't even move. There was no gate or anything to the backyard. It was just a wide open yard since this wasn't a rural area. I simply walked around the house to the backyard. I didn't understand how he couldn't hear me. When I got to the back door, I made a shocking realization. The figure standing by the door was a taxidermied human being. I ran straight back the way I came and back to my car. I looked up one last time before driving off. The blinds to the window I had peeked into had been shut, but I could see 2 of the blinds creased open. Somebody was at that window, watching me. You could probably guess I had the gas pedal to the floor the whole way home. The whole situation still makes no sense. All the car parts, the fact that there was no Toyota Camry, the taxidermied human being. Given that there was no car there, leads me to believe that whoever that man was wasn't planning on selling me anything. And that also leads me to the disturbing thought that I was very close to becoming a lifeless statue staring out that man's back door. This happened when I was really little and often left alone with my single mom. She always came to check on me every night when she would get up to go to the bathroom. This one night in particular, I remember waking up thinking I heard something in my closet. I looked up and my mom was at the foot of my bed giving me a playful wave. She told me to go back to sleep. She then went into my closet and pulled the door until it was just barely open, and she just stood in there, poking her head through the crack of the barely open closet. I remember vividly seeing her eye peeking through the crack at me. I laughed like any little kid would do in that situation, and then fell asleep moments later. When I was eating cereal the next morning, I asked my mom why she was hiding in my closet last night, and she just stopped and gave me a puzzled and concerned look. She told me she hadn't been in the room all night. At first she assumed somebody had broken into the house, but she soon realized it was some kind of hallucination or dream. Since this experience, I've only had 2 other hallucinations, neither of them as vivid or as creepy as this one. In the year 2009, I was spending a weekend with my uncle on his ranch when my parents were renovating the new house we had just bought. It was my second night there, a Saturday, and it happened to be during one of the biggest thunderstorms of the year. I'd say there were at least 3 crashes of thunder and lightning per minute. And we were in the heart of the storm because the thunder would crash not even a second after the lightning would. I always enjoyed listening to storms while laying in bed. So I stayed up a little later watching TV, just enjoying the ambiance. After the movie I was watching finally ended, I turned off the TV and tried to fall asleep. As I heard the lightning strike from outside, I could have sworn I heard some kind of metallic thud coming from outside at the same time. I didn't pay it too much mind. 20 seconds later, I could have sworn I heard it again. A very distinct metallic thud coming from outside to match the timing of the lightning. I really don't mean to make this sound like a cliche horror story, but my uncle really is a kind of creepy guy, and I was never close with him even remotely, so for that reason I didn't feel right going to wake him up. I just tried to forget about it. Now I was getting concerned. What the hell could that be? After the 3rd time, I finally got out of bed and walked over to the window of the guest bedroom. The water pouring down on the window made it extra hard to see what was out there in the dark fields. A flash of lightning momentarily lit up the property, but I couldn't see anything. However, once again, the sound of a metal hit accompanied it. The sound was so close now, it sounded like it was coming from the left of the window at a blind spot. I was going to do something I knew my uncle wouldn't be happy about. It would be a bit messy, but I was going to open the window and peer outside to see if I could see what the sound was. I unhooked the window lock and slid it up, and immediately the wind of the storm blew drops of rain into the room and onto me. I stuck my head out the window and looked to the left, and at that very moment, lightning lit up the property once again, and I could see a person dressed in all black crouched down by the outside basement door with his hand raised in the air. And before the sky went dark, I caught the briefest glimpse of what the sound was coming from. The person was bashing at the basement door lock. I pulled my head in and quietly shut the window, making sure to lock it. I was in a panic. I feared he might have seen or heard me. I ran back to bed and pretended to be asleep, facing away from the window. Lightning crashed once again, but this time there was no metallic thud. My heart must have dropped as I realized this. I just stayed put in bed for the longest time, hoping whoever was out there would go away. After maybe 3 more lightning crashes without any thuds accompanying them, I thought it would be safe to go tell my uncle. I turned to face the window and screamed. There was a figure, clear as day, standing at the window, looking in at me. I screamed as loud as I could and ran straight to my uncle's room. He went outside with his hunting rifle with nothing on but his pajamas, not even socks. He ran around the entire property yelling like a madman, but didn't find anyone. The next morning, we were able to better see the marks on the basement door lock. It was almost bashed open. Maybe 3 or 4 more good hits would have done it, according to my uncle. He was proud of me for picking up on it. Luckily, I was out of there that same day. My uncle hasn't told us of any incidents since, so I think he's been okay. Not that we talked to him much at all. I'm grateful I stayed up a little later that night watching that movie, because I may have just stopped a robbery, or possibly much worse. I don't care if anyone judges me, but I like to go to the movie theaters alone. My work schedule's all over the place. I often don't work weeknights. So on a stormy Wednesday night, a night not many other people would be thinking to go drive to a movie theater, I did just that. I always like avoiding crowds in anything I do. That's just how I am. It was 2017. I went to see some low-key movie that probably wasn't at the top of most people's must-see movie lists. I was the only one in the theater, just like I expected. I sat myself right in the center seat of one of the higher-up rows and put my feet up on the seat in front of me. About 20 minutes into the movie, I'd say, I noticed someone a few aisles down. I didn't notice them coming in. The theater was dark because the scene in the movie at the time was in a dark room. They weren't sitting in a seat like a normal person, though. All I saw of them was the top half of their head, peering over one of the seats to be looking in a direction that definitely was not the screen. It was still too dark to be able to tell if they were looking directly at me or not, but when the scene changed to a brighter background, the whole theater got brighter. Bright enough to see they were looking basically at me. But their face was so pale and lifeless looking, and their hair messy and wiry looking, I couldn't even tell if it was a man or a woman. I'm an introvert, or just an awkward person, so I didn't really want to ask if there was something wrong. I viewed that as confrontation. The screen went darker again, and at the same time, the person lowered down behind the chair completely until I couldn't see them anymore. They were completely hidden from my view. I couldn't concentrate on the movie now, though. I was actually very uncomfortable. Actually quite terrified. I didn't get up, though. I stayed put in my seat. Many scenes in the movie passed. I almost forgot about what happened. Almost. Just when I was getting back into the movie, the person's head appeared from behind a seat again. This time much closer, only like 3 rows of seats away from me. I actually let out a holy shit and a loud yell because it genuinely made me jump. Now I was able to see more detail or features in their face. They actually looked lifeless. Their eyes, motionless, hung open. But still, I somehow couldn't tell if they were looking directly at me or not. Now I could better see it was a man with long, unkempt hair. I noped the F out of my seat and down the road to the exit. I had to pass the row in which the person was in to get to the exit door. As I passed the row, I looked down it, and while I expected to see the rest of the person's body sitting hunched behind the seats, instead what I saw was something you'd see in a nightmare. There was some guy basically laying on the floor, holding up a severed head perched on a stick. I didn't stick around to see if it was some sick joke or if the head was real or not. I ran for it through the exit door, and I ran out of the back exit of the building to the parking lot. I drove home in a panic, heart racing. That head looked so real. I got home and did some research about possible recent murders or missing people in the area, and I found something. After browsing a list of missing people in the area, I found the picture of a 17-year-old boy named Donald Watkins who had gone missing a month prior, and based on the picture I found, his face could have matched the head I saw in that theater. Of course, that could be my brain trying to connect any similarities, but the hair, the nose, the eyes, they looked like they could actually be a match. The next day, I simply made a call to the theater and told them the story and suggested they check their cameras and see if anything strange came up. I gave them my number to reach me if they needed to, but I never heard from them. I chose to not spend any more of my time on it. A long time ago, I very briefly lived with my good friend Ben on a quiet street in Northville, Michigan, perhaps notable for being close to Detroit. It wasn't the nicest house, or block, or area for that matter, but the price was unbeatable for 2 broke young men like ourselves. Ben and I went way back to when we were like 9 years old, and at the time of this story, we worked the same job, and rooming together with him seemed like a great idea. On our first day there, we quickly figured out that the creepy-looking house across the street with the overgrown grass and bushes was abandoned, as were a lot of the houses around the area. In fact, something we somehow hadn't noticed before, there was even graffiti next to one of the front windows and on the fence. Our neighbors on one side seemed like creeps, and we didn't even want to approach them. The neighbor on the other side was an older dude, a very interesting hippie-ish kind of guy. His name was Marv. He had long gray hair with a matching long gray beard. He seemed friendly at first, I guess, but also very weird and hard to talk to. We spoke with him on our second day there after work. He told us the place had been abandoned for as long as he could remember. That night, with the sun almost set, while we were sitting on the front stoop smoking, I looked to the house across the street and felt a little tingle in my stomach out of shock. I stood up, threw my cigarette onto the floor and crushed it. Ben looked at me confused, and I pointed to the window across the street. I was pointing at a face, which I saw staring at me through the lone upstairs window of the house. Do you see that? There's someone at that window. Ben looked at the window immediately, but I saw the person move their head away before he could see it. It's weird. I explained to Ben that I didn't even know if it was a male or female, old or young. The glass was just too foggy. All I knew was that I saw the eyes, and they were staring at us. Ben told me I was legitimately creeping him out. He believed me. We ran over to Marv's house to tell him, but strangely he didn't answer his door, even though we saw him watching TV in his tiny, messy living room through the window. The fact that the guy wouldn't answer creeped us out even more. Dude, what the fuck is going on with this place? Ben laughed, but the situation couldn't stay comical for long. Ben owned a katana. He brought it to mention and suggested we go across the street with it, break into the house from the backyard, and see what was going on. We were always adventurous, daring troublemakers as kids, so this was our natural response to the situation. When it got dark, we went across the street to the backyard, broke off the board holding the back door shut, and entered the house. We both had heavy-duty flashlights with us to light up basically any room we were in. The house was dusty, decrepit, but surprisingly seemed to remain untouched from the inside. No graffiti or signs of vandalism anywhere. Still, the place was disturbingly creepy, and we immediately joked that we should get the fuck out of there. But we pressed on. The first floor was pathetically small like our own. A kitchen, a tiny living room, and a dining room. There was no basement and one closet. The first floor was clear. We both agreed to check the upstairs. We tiptoed over to the stairs, and Ben, out of nowhere, screamed, "Is anybody up there?" "Dude, why the fuck would you do that?" I said quietly. Then we both froze in fear when we heard rapid stomping suddenly appear from above us. It was someone heavy, and it sounded like they were running over to the stairway. I literally felt like my heart stopped. Ben, the one with the katana, was the first to flee, grabbing my arm and tugging me with him. We went out the way we entered and ran back to the house, where we saw Marv just standing by his window, watching us. We didn't know what to do. He just intently stared at us as we froze to catch our breath in front of the house. We went inside, decided not to call the police, and moved out literally the next day. We explained to the landlord that the location was just too inconvenient for us, and we needed to leave ASAP. We drove away from that house and never looked back. For my son's 12th birthday, my wife and I threw him a little party in the backyard. We invited the whole family, as we usually did for any of our kids' birthdays, and let him invite all of his friends too. We live in rural New Jersey, so our backyard connects to forest on two sides. We also have a pretty big property, which allowed us to space out a bunch of tables on the grass with food and refreshments. The little party went into the night. Most of our guests left, but closer family and some of our friends stayed late. It was probably 8 o'clock. The mosquitoes were out in full force, so I decided to run over to the shed at the far end of the backyard by the woods to fetch the tiki torches. I grabbed like 6 torches and set them on the grass while I went back in to look for fuel. However, while I was in the shed, I heard steps in the woods. I stopped what I was doing to take a look out there, but honestly, it was just too dark to see out into the woods. After finding the fuel, I went back to the part of the yard everyone else was at and pitched the torches into the ground. The 6 torches gave off a decent amount of light while keeping us safe from the blood-sucking pests. There were about 6 kids left, including my son, and they all wanted to play hide-and-seek in the woods. My wife and I allowed it, just making sure to tell them to stay close to the tree line. My son and his friends went to play their little game in the woods, which left the rest of us to sit in peace for a little bit. It was a solid 15 minutes of talking with relatives and hearing the kids laughing and yelling in the near distance out in the woods. But all of a sudden, the yelling turned to screams, concerning-sounding screams from the kids. All of us looked at each other, sitting up in concern. The kids one by one came running out of the woods, yelling that there's something in there. We don't have bears or any big predatory animals around here, so that was not the first thing we assumed it to be. I told all the kids to stay near the patio area. My brother Dom and I, being the biggest men there, decided to go investigate. We took a couple flashlights and off we went into the pitch-black woods. The only sounds we heard around us were crickets and other night bugs. So we went deeper, and that's when we started to hear something else. It sounded like an animal at first, but as we followed the sound to get closer, the sound started to become more human-like. We continued to walk, and we agreed we both had the feeling that we were being watched, like stalked. I put my arm out to stop Dom. Standing in the silence now, the best way I could describe the sound we were hearing was a moaning, angry kind of sound. It sounded human, but it was a bizarre sound. Then, a few cracks of the leaves on the ground ahead of us. We aimed our lights over there, and there was someone or something behind the tree. The moaning sound stopped. Dom stepped forward and called out. What happened next was textbook horror movie stuff. A scream, so loud, so blood-curdling, so inhuman, filled the air. I'm sure it could be heard for miles. Dom and I turned and booked it back to the property. We waved at everyone to go inside when we made it back. Dom got on the phone with the sheriff's department. They said it was probably a wild animal. We wanted to insist it was a human, but we honestly couldn't. We to this day don't know who or what we saw and heard in those woods, but it was definitely stalking us and the kids when they were playing hide and seek. And that scream we heard, it just didn't sound human to us. A Redditor by the name of Jessica shared footage she recorded in the Airbnb she was renting. There wasn't supposed to be anybody else in the rental, and she didn't even meet the owners as the keys were left in the mailbox. Shortly into her stay, she was getting ready to take a shower when she started hearing sounds from inside the walls. She rushed to get her camera and get the sounds on video. This is what she captured. As you can see, after finding a sealed ventilation duct and pulling the seal off of it, the terrifying voices of people speaking Latin became much clearer and sound as though they were speaking the Trinitarian formula and other religious phrases. Strangely, the voices apparently fell silent abruptly, but that wasn't where the nightmarish experience ended for Jessica. That night, with the bathroom door open and the bathroom light on, a picture was taken of her as she was sleeping, and the person who took the picture was holding a note in front of the camera that said it's rude to eavesdrop. This was the security footage recorded one rainy night in Huacho, Brazil. In the recording, a confused-looking woman is seen walking through the street in the rain, And at first this seems relatively normal, nothing too unusual, until the woman seems to slowly disappear as she gets closer to the bottom of the screen, until she vanishes altogether. When zoomed in, you can also see the woman seems scantily dressed for the weather conditions seen in the video. Sure, someone can say it's just a smudge on the screen or perhaps some other digital problem. However, moments later, a motorcycle passes by in the same region in which the woman seemed to vanish, yet it's completely visible. And then the same could be said with the truck as it makes its turn, completely visible. It also appears that the driver of the truck may have been reacting to what he also just witnessed to be a vanishing woman. Whether this was just camera trickery or really a wandering apparition is up to the viewer to decide. This video was captured in Costa Rica on someone's home security camera. At an off hour in the night, out from the woods comes a bizarre, horrifying looking creature. First, one might assume it's just a person doing some kind of crab walk, or if this were Australia, they would just assume it's another spider. But you don't even have to watch too closely to ask why or how the arms and legs would be the same length if this were a person. If it was just a person contorting his or her body, the creature wouldn't appear as long as it does and would most likely have a noticeable lump in its back from them contorting their torso. Also, based on the dog's reactions, this was not the work of CGI, as they were reacting to something that's actually there and cause for alarm. This fourth video was taken from the Japanese YouTube channel Omogatoki Films. Their channel focuses on exploring haunted locations and capturing paranormal events on video. In January of this year, the owners of the channel were contacted by a real estate agent regarding a house he's been having trouble selling, due to the fact that the house used to be owned by a family that mysteriously disappeared in 2013.
僕が前勤めていた不動産屋さんの元先輩、何やら僕らに対してちょっと一度見てほしい物
その古い戸建てを会社で買ったんだけど、急に飛び込みできた人で、いくらで売りたいか聞くじゃん。でそしたらもう本当破格の
売り主さんが持っていたその土地の上に3人の家族が家を建てて住み始めたらしいんですよね。ただ今から 6-7 年ぐらい前にある日を境にその3人
All of the previous owner's belongings were left in the house, adding to the mystery. The real estate agent refuses to even enter the house as he believes there's a dark entity in the house, and he hopes that they would be able to search the house and find any kind of explanation, as this is what they do for a living. The agent mentions to them to make sure to keep all the doors shut while investigating the house, but doesn't mention why. As the two are exploring this closet, they notice something after reviewing the footage. See if you can find it.
ほら、もう全部開いてるもん。ああ、確かに確かに。すっごい、ほんと、物がやばい。
If you didn't see it, behind a clothes rack, you can see 2 bare feet underneath. This isn't the last time they can be seen. As they search a nearby room, the feet can be seen again, this time much closer and visibly barefoot. Later on in the night, one of the two decide to place a camera in the dark and sit in one room, waiting for something to happen. After about 15 minutes, he decided to investigate other rooms, while still remembering to shut all the doors behind him. As you just saw, there was a face looking in through the door, but as he approaches, it disappears. There's no one outside the door. It could be speculated that the house is haunted by the family that mysteriously disappeared almost a decade ago. This was some alleged sighting of La Llorona. La Llorona is known as a ghost who roams waterfront areas mourning her drowned children. This video was captured in León, Guanajuato, Mexico. The video is of a man running from what resembles La Llorona. In the video, if you slow it down and zoom in, the figure in the distance resembles a woman in a white dress crying and yelling. The man was coming home from a party around 3 o'clock in the morning when he encountered the woman in front of him. As he starts to run in fear, the woman starts shouting at him, not making any sense of what she's saying. The man allegedly died 3 days after the sighting, and the cause of death was ruled a heart attack. This video was recorded in November of 2020, and it's just recently getting noticed. This was the footage captured by Russian YouTuber Dark Ghost. He posts high-quality ghost hunting videos, and this one might be one of his scariest. A woman had written to him about her deceased son who was obsessed with the paranormal and finding out what happens to the human soul after death and the afterlife. One day he told his mother that he discovered a way to contact deceased relatives, and he traveled to the abandoned village where his late grandmother lived. A week later, the mother received a call from the son, saying he was hearing the voices of his grandparents among other entities. This call was the last that was heard of the son, and his body was found on the streets of the village. The cause of death was ruled to be acute heart failure. The mother asked Dark Ghost to visit the grandparents' old house where the son would often visit, and this was some of the footage he captured. Various sounds such as footsteps and knocks can be heard throughout the video, and on multiple occasions, doors and cabinets can be seen swinging open or closed on their own. If you didn't see it, a black shadow can be seen floating across the screen clear as day.
Либо шкаф все грохочет, я не понимаю, либо комод. Опа.
Next, he enters a creepy red room populated with disturbing pictures that the woman's son would collect and bring to the house.
Вроде бы как. У меня вообще всего тут такого, как бы, фотографий таких. Пипец. Это просто жесть.
This is definitely one of those houses that an explorer should not go to alone. Based on the events in this video, there may have been someone or something in the house with him, watching him the entire time. Could it be the spirit of the woman's son? Or perhaps a much more hostile entity? Or could it all just be trickery? As usual, that's up for you to decide.
Number 6. Living Gnome. In 2008, a creepy gnome was caught on film in Argentina. Jose Alvarez, who filmed the gnome, reported that they caught the creature on film while larking about in their hometown of General Güemes, Argentina. He stated, "We were chatting about our last fishing trip. It was 1 in the morning. I began to film a bit with my mobile phone while the others were chatting and joking. Suddenly we heard something. A weird noise as if someone was throwing stones. We looked to one side and saw that the grass was moving. To begin with, we thought it was a dog, but when we saw this gnome-like figure begin to emerge, we were really afraid." Other locals have since come forward to say that they have spotted the gnome, and the town has been covered in a pall of fear ever since the first sighting. Number 5. The Devil's Footprints. On the night of February 9th, 1855, after a light snowfall, a series of hoof-like marks appeared in the snow. These footprints, measuring 1.5 to 2.5 inches wide and 8 inches apart, continued throughout the countryside for a total of over 100 miles, and although veering at various points, for the greater part of their course followed straight lines. Houses, rivers, haystacks, and other obstacles were traveled straight over, and footprints appeared on the tops of snow-covered roofs and high walls which way in the footprints' path, as well as leading up to and exiting various drain pipes of as small as a 4-inch diameter. There were also rumors about sightings of a devil-like figure in the Devon area during the scare. Many townspeople armed themselves and attempted to track down the beast responsible without success. Recently, on the night of March 12, 2009, more strange marks, corresponding to those left in 1855, were found again in Devon. Number 4. Jeff. In September 1931, the Irving family claimed to hear persistent scratching and rustling noises behind their farmhouse's wooden wall panels. At first, they thought it was a rat, but then the unseen creature began making different sounds, sometimes spitting like a ferret, or growling like a dog, or gurgling like a baby. The creature soon revealed an ability to speak, and introduced itself as Jeff, a mongoose. It claimed to have been born in New Delhi, India, in 1852. According to Vori, the daughter, who was the only person to see him properly, Jeff was the size of a small rat with yellowish fur and a large bushy tail. Jeff variously claimed to be an extra clever mongoose, an earthbound spirit, and a ghost in the form of a weasel. He once said, "I am a freak. I have hands and I have feet, and if you saw me, you would faint. You'd be petrified, mummified, turned into stone or a pillar of salt." Vori Irving, who took Jeff under her wing, died in 2005. In an interview published late in life, she claimed that Jeff was not her creation. Number 3. James Warson. On September 3, 1873, a man named James Warson had accepted a challenge to race in record time from the town of Leamington to the town of Coventry, a 20-mile trek. He had been boasting of his foot skills and then was asked to prove them, so, with sporting good spirits, he set about to do just that. 2 friends, Hammerson Burns and Barham Wise, followed behind in a horse-drawn carriage. Burns brought along his camera. Warson was never out of their sight, and would often turn around while running to exchange some friendly words with the 2 riders. Running in the middle of the road, Warson suddenly appeared to stumble and pitch forward, having time enough for only one short, piercing scream. Wise later said, It was the most ghastly sound either of us have ever heard. But as Warson pitched forward with that terrible cry, instead of falling to the ground as he appeared to be about to have done, he completely and totally vanished in mid-fall before ever striking the ground. The road itself told the story and Wise took the pictures to prove it. There, in the soft dirt, were Warson's footprints. They led down the middle of the road, looked as if the runner stumbled, and there they disappeared. A search was called and the locals scoured the area for James. The bloodhounds used in the search were strangely reluctant to approach the spot where Warson disappeared. He was never seen or heard from again. Number 2. August 7th, 1973 will remain a day of mystery and possible tragedy. Several people in New Mexico that day, using CB radios, heard the disturbing cries for help from a little boy. He said his name was Larry, and that he was trapped in a red and white pickup truck. He was with his father, who he thinks had a heart attack and was dead. He said that they had been on a rabbit hunting trip when his father collapsed on the steering wheel. Larry claimed that the truck had flipped over into a ravine and both doors were jammed shut and he was unable to escape. The boy's signal faded in and out over the next few days, and was also heard in California, Wyoming, and Arizona. In a panic, Larry began to flip between channels crying for help. Police began a search and rescue team. One helicopter pilot who was searching the Manzano Mountains in New Mexico for Larry says that he made contact with a little boy calling for help, but he called himself David, not Larry. A family traveling from Missouri was reported missing on August 11th, and they had a son named Larry, but they were eventually found. On August 12th, an army sergeant claimed to have spoken to the boy for 3 hours, but could not get him to give more information about himself, like his phone number or address, etc. No more contact could be made with Larry. It is presumed his battery died. The search was called off on August 13th. The police stated that there was no concrete evidence. They also say that the boy, if real, may have died sooner than the transmission stopped, and that the subsequent transmissions from different states, some were even heard in Canada, were hoaxes. Many believe it was a hoax, but those who spoke to Larry swear to this day that it wasn't, that the emotion and the crying they heard from little Larry was no doubt the real thing. Number 1. On November 29th, 1970, a professor and his daughters were hiking in the Isdalen Valley in Norway when they came across the partially charred remains of a young woman. She was surrounded by a large quantity of sleeping pills and bottles of gasoline. All the clothing she was wearing had the tags removed and her fingerprints had been sanded off. A dental screening was done, and some of her dental work was done using techniques only found in Latin America. She was eventually traced back to 2 suitcases at the NSB train station in Bergen. Her luggage contained a prescription lotion with the doctor's name removed, and a few pieces of broken glass with partial fingerprints, and 500 German marks, which is the equivalent of $350 under the lining of one of the suitcases. They discovered the woman had traveled by train across Europe under 9 different names. There were diaries found with her things that contained cryptic notes that the police deciphered were codes listing the places that she had been. Witnesses say she wore wigs as she traveled and spoke several languages such as French, German, English, and Dutch. She stayed at several hotels in Bergen. After checking into each, she would change rooms several times, always requiring a balcony, and would always order porridge with milk for room service. A local man came to the police saying that 5 days prior to the body's discovery, he came across a very elegant woman while hiking. He noted that she wasn't dressed for being outdoors, much less on a remote hiking trail, and that her face was distorted with fear. He claimed that she attempted to mouth something to him, but was followed closely by 2 large men in black coats. The man waited 32 years to come public with this story, stating that when he contacted the police, the officer who answered told him, "Forget her, she was dispatched. The case will never be solved." Ouija boards have long been a supposed way to connect with spirits and demons. They're sold in most board game aisles and toy stores, and work by one or more participants placing their hands on a plastic or wood piece called a planchette with a small glass circle in it, which is used to highlight a single letter on the board. The participants are then supposed to ask any question, and the piece is supposed to move to form answers out of the letters, supposedly by spirits. The game is normally played as a gag within groups of friends, and the piece is usually moved by one of the participants as a joke, or even unintentionally. However, there are countless stories of people who claim to have actually contacted demons and had serious repercussions because of it. Number 6. A mother and daughter who were reportedly told during a Ouija board session that they would soon die were both critically ill in the hospital following a fire at their home, which was engulfed in flames mere hours after the Ouija board made its grim predictions. The two were treated in a hospital after the fire. It's said that the mother and daughter used the Ouija board in an attempt to contact their dead dog on the night before the fire. This beloved family pet was dismembered and killed by the mother's husband, Paul Carroll, who initially claimed he killed the dog because it became possessed following a previous Ouija board session. Paul was sentenced later that month for causing unnecessary suffering to an animal. Following the Ouija board session where the mother and daughter attempted to contact their deceased dog, their neighbor Donna Sowerby revealed that Katrina Livingstone had confessed that the Ouija board had predicted their deaths. Number 5. St. Andrew's Boarding School in Delaware is a well-known private boarding school with a very positive reputation, which may make it more surprising that a group of boys snuck out past curfew one night to use a Ouija board in the woods. The group of 4 came prepared, equipped with candles and a flat surface to place the board and candles on. The 4 boys asked the board various questions, playing religiously, trying not to make a joke of it. There was no movement until one of the boys asked the question, "Will anything bad happen in my future?" The piece then slowly began to move, spelling out the words, "right now." One of the boys, Ferlin Mako, suddenly started twitching and jerking his arms and head. He then turned and focused on one of the boys next to him with a devilish stare before lunging at him and screaming, "I don't know you." The 2 other boys grabbed Ferlin off of him and he shortly passed out. The 3 boys carried him back to his dorm room where they left him in his bed. The next morning, Ferlin showed no signs of remembrance from the previous night. They fessed up and took him to the nurse to see what could have been wrong with him, but of course she didn't have much of an explanation. Number 4. A Redditor who says he was about 12 or 13 was spending the night at his friend Michael's house, goofing around with a Ouija board with Michael and his sister in their basement. They were just kind of scaring themselves, moving the planchette around for fun, not taking it very seriously, when they got a rather disturbing message. They asked the question, "Where are you?" And in response, the planchette started spelling something. I-C-A-N. It continued on until it spelled out the sentence, "I can see you through the window." The 3 kids laughed, thinking one of the others spelled out the phrase. There was a small window in the basement room where they were, and just the backyard and woods past the driveway were visible through the window, though it was much too dark to see anything outside. They all looked at the window anyway as a kind of natural response, and as they did, they heard that sound. The stomach-churning sound of someone or something from outside in the dark backyard at 11:30 at night viciously knocking on the basement window. Being the young kids they were, they all screamed until Michael's dad came rushing downstairs. When they explained what happened to his dad, he took them outside with the backyard lights on to search for anyone who may be lurking around. As soon as they told him about what the Ouija board said, Michael's dad ushered them inside and suggested they go to bed. That was when he stopped believing what the kids had said. Number 3. In 2014, 3 American friends were taken to the hospital after reportedly becoming possessed by evil spirits while playing with a Ouija board. Alexandra Huerta, aged 22, was playing the game with her brother Sergio, aged 23, and 18-year-old cousin Fernando Cuevas at a house in the village of San Juan in southwest Mexico. But minutes into it, She apparently started growling and thrashing around in a trance-like state, as this video captures. Meanwhile, Sergio and Fernando also reportedly started showing signs of possession, including feelings of blindness, deafness, and hallucinations. Paramedics were called and took the three to the hospital. They restrained Alexandra to prevent her from hurting herself before treating the three with painkillers, anti-stress medication, and eye drops, which seemingly worked. The director of public safety in a nearby town said the medical rescue of these three was very complicated. They had involuntary movements, and it was very difficult to transfer them to the nearest hospital because they were so erratic. He said they spoke of feeling numbness, double vision, blindness, deafness, hallucinations, muscle spasms, and difficulty swallowing. Alexandra's parents called paramedics after a local Catholic priest refused to perform an exorcism on the three because they were not regular churchgoers. Number 2. Three brothers were using a Ouija board while their parents were out on a cold, rainy night. They were playing the game on the dining room table with the lights dimmed, asking typical questions. They started with questions like, "What is my name?" and "What is your name?" which didn't summon any responses. Then they asked the question, "Is anybody there?" which caused the planchette to slowly move to the word "yes" at the top of the board. The boys then asked the board, "When will we die?" and the board formed the sentence, "Death comes now." Only minutes later, they received a disturbing phone call. It was the boy's father on the other end, crying hysterically. He told one of the boys that he swerved off the road into a tree and their mom died on impact. The dad later blamed himself for driving without getting enough sleep and said he thought he saw someone standing in the middle of the road, so he tried to swerve out of the way, but the slippery roads only caused him to lose control off the road. Number 1. Frank and Sarah Piscatelli and their friend Joe Pedenzin were in their basement playing with a Ouija board on December 15th, 2013. A recent event motivated them to try the Ouija board. Apparently, Frank and Sarah's grandmother contacted her dead husband just days before she passed away using one. Frank and Sarah wanted to contact their grandmother, so they brought along a friend to bring in more energy to the board to increase the chances of getting a response. Instead of contacting their grandmother, however, they allegedly contacted a demon who introduced itself as Zozo. Instead of answering the questions the kids asked, the board spelled out random answers that didn't even relate to the questions. Frank demanded that the demon let them speak to their grandmother, and that's when the lights clicked off in the basement. The power did not go out. They all heard the light switch flick off from the bottom of the stairs. One of them grabbed a flashlight and shined it over to the bottom of the stairs. And for a brief moment, saw a black figure standing by the light switch. Even in the light provided by the flashlight, the figure was completely black. Just as suddenly, the lights turned back on and the figure was gone. The three ran upstairs and locked the basement door. The next day, they tucked the Ouija board back in the closet and never touched it again. Frank and Sarah both agreed that the black figure they saw resembled their grandmother.
New Year's Eve is a holiday and occasion many people look forward to and use as motivation to pursue goals they usually wouldn't other times of the year. For many others, it's a day despised and resented. The following are 7 creepy things that happened on New Year's Eve, creating for some unsettling starts to New Year's. On New Year's Eve of 1920, the Drake Hotel in Chicago celebrated its opening night, which started with elegance but ended in tragedy. The Drake was expected to be one of the city's most beautiful and elegant hotels, but it ended in tragedy because it was the night a woman referred to as the Woman in Red ended her life. On this New Year's Eve day, a man and his fiancée, who was wearing a red silk gown, attended the gala held in the Drake's Gold Coast room. The man stepped away and did not return for over an hour, so his fiancée went looking for him. When she found him, he was accompanied with another woman whom he was showing attention to. The devastated woman climbed the roof and jumped to her death. Since then, guests at the Drake have reported seeing her apparition in the Gold Coast room, the Palm Court, and on the 10th floor, as well as the roof. People also still to this day allegedly report hearing a woman's cries on the 10th floor and on the roof. Some believe her soul is condemned to replay her final night, attempting to find peace with the final tragic chapter of her life. Workers and guests have also on numerous occasions reported getting a creepy, uncomfortable feeling in the ballroom. On New Year's Eve in 2013, a man named Joseph Scott was hosting a house party among his close friends. The party was going normal until a few different friends started asking Joe about the sounds coming from the ceiling. The party was being held in the living room, and the attic was right above the living room. Joseph went to the bedroom which had the attic door inside of it and pulled the attic door down. He did this without telling anyone so as to not make any of the guests uncomfortable, but after multiple comments about the noise, he couldn't just ignore it and have that lingering in his head. Upon checking the attic, Joseph heard a loud, distinct cracking sound from the other side, behind a wooden wall. He thought there might have been a raccoon up there, so he walked across the wooden boards of the attic, hearing his intoxicated friends down below in the living room laughing, asking, "What the hell is that noise?" When he got to the back section of the attic, which according to the layout was directly on top of the front door area of the living room, he saw somebody's hands wrapped around the top of a box, but their body wasn't visible. Joseph screamed as he was startled, but then he quickly assumed it was one of his friends. He went closer, and somebody who he didn't know popped their head out from behind the box. A middle-aged, angry-looking man. Joseph screamed bloody murder as he ran out of the attic yelling for his friends. He and his guy friends waited by the attic door guarding it, while they waited for the police. Police were able to remove the man from the attic with ease. He was unarmed. The man didn't know anyone at the party, and he admitted to simply walking in during the party. He claimed he meant no wrongdoing. However, it's pretty likely he was planning on robbing the place when everyone was gone, or possibly worse. Similarly, with this one we have another party crashing type of story, as yet another uninvited guest somehow finds themselves in a random party. Only with this one, the guests seem to have materialized out of nowhere and joined the storyteller's New Year's Eve party. There was an older woman dressed in all white who was seen by most of the partygoers. All of the doors and windows were locked, and no one admitted to letting the old woman into the house. Being in a polite and festive mood, the hostess did not ask the lady in white to leave. But according to multiple party guests, the woman reported that she was lost and couldn't find the party she was actually heading to. Upon leaving the party, she dropped 2 scarves on the doorstep. To this day, nobody that was there at that party knows how she got in. To add to this mystery, the writer adds that her cousin saw the same woman in his dreams a few nights later. No one ever saw her again. This one was recounted by a young woman and her boyfriend. The two were cleaning up the boyfriend's place, getting ready to have people over for New Year's Eve. As the couple was cleaning, they kept losing things and finding them back in the same place a few minutes later. The couple thought that they were just imagining it at first, or that the other was moving the objects without them seeing, but it kept happening over and over, and every time they needed something, it would disappear. Eventually, company starts to arrive. Their friend Carson gets there first, and the 3 sit down and watch TV. That's when the boyfriend made a statement. And in return, an unknown man's voice said, "Right." The 3 of them looked around to see if the boyfriend's roommates had returned, but no one was there. Later, when the roommates did return, they told the couple and Carson that they had been hearing the same thing since the night of the recently passed eclipse. A while later, the woman went to the bathroom, and as she was washing her hands, she heard a loud cough right behind her ear. All of the hairs on her neck stood up as she ran out of there. At first, no one believed her, but when the rest of their company arrived, and they too eventually said that they heard a cough in the bathroom as well, it's not hard to tell why everyone believed her after that. The woman heard a cough in the bathroom one more time the next morning, but didn't hear anything again for a whole year, leading her to believe the strange occurrences only happen around the holidays. The Monte Vista Hotel in Flagstaff, Arizona opened on New Year's Day of 1927, and during the 1940s and 50s was a popular spot for Hollywood guests, and more than 100 Western movies were filmed nearby. Some of the guests of the hotel included Bing Crosby, Jane Russell, Gary Cooper, Spencer Tracy, and many others. There are many stories and legends of ghosts in this hotel, one of the more notable ones being the Phantom Bellboy, who knocks on doors and then vanishes. There have been dozens of guests over the years reporting that somebody would knock on their doors, then when they open them, nobody would be there. Alongside the bellboy is often what is believed to be a woman who has been seen multiple times outside of the suite that author Zane Grey stayed in, which, as it turns out, is a room in which 2 prostitutes had been murdered long ago. But there's more with this hotel. Multiple guests who have stayed in the room that actor Gary Cooper stayed in have reported hearing a man coughing and clearing his throat, pacing back and forth. Many guests have reported feeling unnerved by the distinct feeling that someone is watching them in that room. One of the last more notable paranormal phenomenons that have been reported in the hotel comes from the saloon. People believe a former bank robber haunts the saloon, as again multiple guests have heard a voice and sounds from people who weren't there, and report an uneasy feeling of being watched. Ellen Roberts, a hotel desk clerk, reported that in 1970, 3 men robbed a nearby bank and to celebrate stopped in our lounge for a drink, even though one of the men had been shot during their escape. While having his drink, the wounded man died, and some believe that he is the spirit that's haunting this area of the building. The hotel remains open to this day, and many people visit in hopes of encountering some paranormal activity. On New Year's Eve 1997, 2 friends Olivia Hope and Ben Smart were celebrating New Year's Eve and ran into trouble after their rental yacht that they planned to sleep on was overcrowded. They located a water taxi still operating and got on. Sharing the ride with them was a man who learned that they had nowhere to sleep and offered to let them stay on his boat. As this was their only real option, they accepted, and the taxi took them to the man's yacht. They climbed aboard the stranger's boat between 4 and 5 a.m. After that, the 2 friends were never seen again. The police conducted an investigation, and despite a number of witnesses describing the same man and the same 2-masted sailing boat, they focused on a man with a smaller boat named Scott Watson. Where this crime case went from there has been a source of controversy ever since. Police are confident they got the man responsible for Ben and Olivia's disappearances and likely murders, but even 2 decades later, the mystery around this case remains. On New Year's Eve of 2017, a group of friends had went on a camping trip to the Acadia National Park in Maine. They had been planning a New Year's camping trip for a long time, and it finally came to fruition. The 6 friends were separated into 3 different tents. They set up camp on a riverbank and set up their portable barbecue and campfire. The group had also come prepared with a bunch of fireworks to shoot off at midnight. For a majority of their time at the campsite, the friends had music blasting on their portable speaker and were drinking tequila. As the group got more intoxicated and louder, one of the friends told everyone to quiet down for a second and lowered the music because he thought he could hear something in the woods. While the group was quiet, they heard it. It was this long and slow whistling sound that would echo every few seconds. One suggested it was an animal, one suggested it was someone whistling, and one suggested it was a literal whistle being blown by someone. When they were quiet for long enough, the sound stopped. Eventually the group resumed playing their music and drinking their drinks. When midnight came, the group began to shoot off their fireworks one at a time. After maybe 4 or 5 fireworks exploding, a blood-curdling scream came from the woods. The screams continued on and on. The group stopped shooting their fireworks and all jumped into their tents to hide, completely freaked out. The screaming stopped, but 3 of the 6 said they heard footsteps approach the campsite, and through the tent walls, reflecting through the glow of the campfire, they could see a very tall, hunched-over figure, ruling out the possibility of some small animal making the screaming sounds. It didn't stay long, though. It disappeared along with the footsteps back into the woods. The group was so terrified they all communicated through their tents, not wanting to leave. They were simply too scared to even take the time to pack up and leave. They waited it out until the sun began to rise. Then the group packed up and they were on their way. Not the most desirable experience to start a new year. In 1986, in the quiet town of Pepperell, Massachusetts, the Bowen family moved into an old colonial house. Frank Bowen was raising his 2 daughters alone after the tragic loss of their mother. Tina was 16, and her younger sister Karen was just 9. They were a close-knit family trying to heal. Not long after moving in, strange things started happening around the house. It began with small stuff, tapping noises in the walls, lights turning on and off by themselves, and furniture appearing slightly out of place. The family dismissed it as the quirks of an old home. Then things escalated. One night, Tina and Karen attempted to use a Ouija board for fun. They laughed at first, but their faces dropped when the board began to respond. Moments later, they heard 3 distinct knocks coming from inside the wall. That's when the fear started to take root. More nights passed and more things went wrong. Objects went missing. The TV would turn on in the middle of the night. Frank began to feel watched, but nothing prepared them for what came next. Frank came home one evening to complete chaos. The house was freezing cold despite the heat being on. Radios blared static. The television was on with no signal. He climbed the stairs and found something horrifying. Standing in the hallway was a teenage boy he didn't recognize. He wore a wig and wedding dress. His face was smeared with makeup. In his hand, he held a hatchet. It was Daniel LaPlante. He had been living in the walls of the Bowen house. He'd broken in months earlier after becoming obsessed with Tina. He'd installed peepholes to spy on her and her family. He moved around the walls and crawl spaces like a rat, coming out only when no one was looking. The noises, the missing items, and the feelings of being watched, it was all him. Frank was able to escape with his daughters and alert the police. When officers searched the house, they found Daniel hiding in a narrow wall cavity, crouched and silent. There were tunnels carved out behind the walls, complete with blankets, food wrappers, and peepholes. LaPlante was arrested, but later released on bail. Not long after, he broke into another home and brutally murdered a pregnant woman and her 2 children. He was later convicted and sentenced to life in prison. The Bowen family never returned to that house. Ohio State in 2013. A group of college students rented a house off campus near Ohio State University. It was an old place but cheap, and 10 people shared it. Like most college rentals, it had quirks: bad wiring, flickering lights, and strange noises. No one thought much of it at first, but one tenant, Brett, started noticing odd things. Cabinets were left open. The fridge seemed emptier than it should be. Lights were turned on that no one remembered using. The basement had a door that was always locked, labeled as a utility closet. The landlord said not to worry about it. Then one night, Brett went down to reset the breaker after a power surge. When he turned the corner, he saw a man walking out of the basement. The man was barefoot and calm, like he belonged there. Brett froze and asked, "Who are you?" The man said his name was Jeremy and walked away. Brett and his roommates broke into the locked door. What they found was shocking. Inside was a small, makeshift room. A mattress, personal photos, books, a guitar. Jeremy had been living in there, undetected for weeks, maybe even longer. He ate their food, used their bathroom, and moved quietly to avoid being found. Turns out, Jeremy had a copy of the house key from a previous tenant and had never officially left. He just started living in the basement after everyone thought he was gone. The police were called, but Jeremy didn't resist. He packed up and left. No charges were filed, but the roommates were deeply shaken. After that, no one felt safe in the house again. Not long after Jeremy left, another group of students moved into that same house. They'd heard stories, but assumed it was just an urban legend. Soon enough, They started to experience the same things: missing food, footsteps at night, doors left open. Eventually, one of the roommates ventured into the basement to investigate, and what he found was disturbing. Someone else had moved in again. Another man, older this time, had quietly taken up residence in the dark corners of the basement. His name was Jared. Like Jeremy, he'd gotten a copy of the key and slipped in without being noticed. He wasn't hostile. In fact, he apologized and offered to leave. But the idea that he had been there, sleeping beneath them, listening and watching, it left the house in a state of paranoia. The house was never the same. The students started locking every door, adding cameras, and avoiding the basement altogether. They later learned that there was a term for this: frogging, when someone secretly lives in another person's home without them knowing. But for them, it wasn't a story or concept. It was real, and it changed the rest of their living experience in the house. This story was sent to me by a girl named Ashley. She lives alone in a small one-bedroom house outside Spokane, Washington. She moved in last winter. The place is old but charming, quiet street and decent size. Her friends warned her about living alone in a house that backed up to thick woods, but she liked the privacy. At first, everything was fine. She settled in, decorated, and worked from home as a freelance graphic designer. Weeks went by without incident until mid-February. It started small and unnoticeable, the kind of things you'd shrug off. A spoon in the sink when she swore she had cleaned it, her shampoo bottle moved slightly, lights flickering once or twice. She thought maybe she was just tired, maybe she was slipping. Then she started hearing things. At night, while watching TV in bed, she'd hear soft tapping in the walls. It wasn't mice. It was slow and rhythmic, almost like knuckles. At first, she assumed it was old pipes or maybe the wood settling, but the tapping would happen after midnight, sometimes right after she turned off the TV, like it was waiting. A few nights later, she heard something new, scraping, coming from the air vent near the ceiling in her bedroom. It only lasted a second, and then silence. She stood on a chair and shined her phone flashlight into the vents, but saw nothing, just darkness. She didn't think much of it until one day, about 3 weeks after the noises started, when she woke up and found her back door wide open. No signs of forced entry or anything missing. The door was just wide open, like someone had left in a hurry, or entered quietly. She called the police, and they looked around and said the lock may have malfunctioned. They advised her to get a new one. She replaced all the locks that day, but something still felt wrong. That night, as she was lying in bed, she heard the scraping again, then footsteps. Not in the livable space of her house, but above her, in the crawl space between the ceiling and the roof. It stopped as soon as she grabbed her phone. She didn't sleep that night, and the next morning, she climbed into the attic through the hallway panel. It was mostly insulation, dead bugs, and old boards. But in one far corner, she found something that didn't belong. A plastic water bottle, an empty granola wrapper, and the unmistakable shape of a rolled-up sleeping bag. Someone had been living up there. She bolted, called the police, and refused to go back in. This time, the officers did a full sweep, and they found him. The man was hiding inside the wall cavity behind her bedroom closet. He had built himself a narrow tunnel, accessed through a loose panel behind the furnace in the laundry room. There was a small camp light, bags of food, and a pile of clothes. They said it looked like he'd been there for weeks, at least a month. He had cut a small peephole through the drywall, covered by a vent grate. From there, he had a perfect view of her bed. He watched her sleep every night. They arrested him, but he had no ID and no explanation. Just some random drifter, likely homeless. But they think he had been watching her even before she moved in. There were scuff marks in the crawl space, like he'd been using it long before she noticed anything wrong. Ashley moved out that same week. The landlord tried to patch up the walls and make the place feel new again, but apparently no one wanted to rent it. The idea that someone could live just inches away from you in the walls, in the dark, is enough to make anyone's skin crawl. Ashley says according to the neighbors, a young couple moved into the house a few months later, and they quickly moved out within under a month. They never got an explanation why. As far as she knows, the house sits vacant today. The case of Theodore Coneys in Denver, Colorado, 1941. Philip Peters was a 73-year-old retired railroad auditor who lived alone while his wife recovered in the hospital. He was known to be polite and quiet, a man of strict routines and old-world values. His home was a small Victorian structure built decades earlier with tight eaves and an attic space that most would consider uninhabitable. Peters had lived in that house for decades, and he knew its creaks, drafts, and shifting shadows. But what he didn't know was that someone else was learning those things too. Someone who had been living right above his head. Theodore Coneys, a local man in his early 60s, had once been acquainted with Peters. Desperately ill and homeless, Coneys decided to visit the home unannounced. Finding it empty, he let himself in. When he saw that the attic had a small crawl space barely large enough for a grown man to squeeze into, he made a decision that would define his life and also end another's. Coneys lived in the attic for weeks, maybe longer, without ever being seen. He crept down only when he was certain Peters was out, stealing small amounts of food, water, and newspapers. He left little evidence of his presence, except for odd creaks and faint footsteps Peters chalked up to the old bones of the house. But one night, everything changed. Peters came home early from a hospital visit and heard movement upstairs. Investigating, he climbed the staircase and was met by Coneys, who was emerging from the attic hatch. Startled and desperate, Coneys attacked Peter with an old iron stove shaker. He beat him to death and disappeared back into the attic. When police arrived, they were at a loss. There was no forced entry, no missing valuables. The doors were locked from the inside. They called it the Ghost House Murder. The case went cold for months. Meanwhile, Coneys stayed in the attic, living feet above the place he'd turned into a crime scene. Eventually, neighbors saw signs of movement in the supposedly abandoned home. The police were called again. When they heard a noise above, they climbed into the attic. There, in a cramped blackened crawl space, they found Coneys. He was filthy, emaciated, and seemed like he'd gone insane. He'd been living in the walls of that house for over 5 weeks after the murder, surviving off stored food and tap water, emerging only to pace and stare through the ventilation grates. He confessed on the spot. The press dubbed him the Denver Spider-Man, and he was sentenced to life in prison. The house was never occupied again. South Carolina, 2012. A woman living with her 5 children began to notice strange things around the house. She had just ended a long and rocky relationship with a man who had a history of erratic behavior, including multiple stints in jail. But she had moved on and tried to rebuild her life, focusing on her kids and her home. One night, as she lay in bed, she noticed something odd. Nails from the ceiling began to push downward. It looked as if someone were trying to remove them from above. She heard scratching and faint thumps, and what she thought was whispering. She dismissed it at first as stress or imagination, but then things escalated. Objects would move slightly from where they had been placed. Her food disappeared faster than it should. One morning, she woke to find insulation debris on her bed. Finally, she sent her nephew to investigate the attic. What he found shocked them all. Her ex-boyfriend was living up there. He had carved out a tiny makeshift living space beside the heating unit. He made a bed fashioned from coats and blankets, and he had been spying on her through a vent directly above her bed. There were plastic cups filled with urine and feces, indicating he hadn't left the attic for days. He admitted he had been up there for over 2 weeks. He came down, apologized, and calmly left before the police could arrest him. But the woman was traumatized, knowing that someone she once trusted had watched her and her children sleep, mere feet above their heads. The woman stated she would be shaken for life. In February of 2020, a man in Oklahoma City started to notice some small things around his home were out of place, like a cereal box was half empty when it should have been full. The back door was unlocked one morning. The thermostat was changed in the night. His first thought was a memory lapse, then maybe an animal or even a prank by a neighbor. But the disturbances continued, always subtle but just enough to be unsettling. One day, he finally decided to investigate the attic. He expected to find a dead raccoon or maybe some birds. Instead, as he poked his head through the hatch, his flashlight landed on something horrifying. A mattress, a pile of clothing, and a man fast asleep. The intruder was in his 30s and looked unkempt and exhausted. The homeowner backed away and called the police, holding the man at gunpoint until they arrived. Investigators later learned the intruder had climbed an exterior staircase and entered through an unused rear attic door. He had lived in the home for nearly a week without being noticed. He survived on pantry food, snuck into the bathroom while the homeowner was out, and returned to his hiding spot like a ghost each time. He had no connection to the homeowner and offered no clear motive beyond desperation. He was arrested and charged with unlawful entry. The homeowner, though unharmed, said the experience forever changed how he viewed his own house. He couldn't sleep in peace, knowing how close someone had been to him, completely undetected. Lisa Leichhardt lives alone in a small 1950s house just outside Portland, Oregon. She bought the home earlier this year after a breakup, eager to start fresh. It wasn't perfect. It creaked in the wind and the pipes groaned sometimes, but it was quiet and cozy, and it was just enough space for her and her dog. At first, she loved the solitude, but about 2 months in, something started to feel off. It began at night when she was in bed. She would hear very soft sounds, like breathing. Very muffled and low breathing, like someone with a heavy chest cold exhaling slowly through their nose. And the thing was, it always seemed to come from the same spot, the wall directly beside her bed. She even moved her nightstand to see if maybe it was a vent or something. There was nothing, just an old blank wall with faded paint and a strange little square panel about a foot wide, bolted shut near the baseboard. It didn't seem important, maybe an old utility hatch, but the breathing kept happening, and then came the other sounds. Late at night, usually between 2 and 4 a.m., she would hear quiet tapping, like fingers tapping on wood. One night, she was lying still, staring at the ceiling, when she heard a whisper. She couldn't make out the words, but it came from inside the wall. That was the first time she left the house in the middle of the night to stay at a friend's place. She told her friend about the noises, and her friend joked that it sounded like her house was haunted, but Lisa didn't think it was a ghost. It sounded too real. She started sleeping on the couch, and even then, some nights she thought she'd heard something faint, like someone crawling through insulation. After about a week of avoiding her bedroom, she finally decided she had to confront it. She took a crowbar to the small square panel on the wall. It came off easier than expected. As it turned out, the screws weren't even holding it in place, so it could have been removed with her bare hands. Behind it was a dark cavity. She turned on her phone flashlight and aimed it into the space. At first, she saw insulation and old wood. Then she noticed that the space actually opened up further. It wasn't just a hollow wall. It was a crawl space, roughly 3 feet wide, stretching back into darkness. She leaned closer. That's when she saw a man sitting in the far corner of the space. His knees were to his chest, and he was filthy, pale, and his eyes wide and locked on hers. He didn't move or speak. All he did was stare back at her like he had been waiting for her. She screamed, dropped her phone, and ran. The man didn't come out, but when the police arrived, they searched the crawlspace area, and he was gone. Inside, they found evidence he'd been living there for weeks. A sleeping bag, plastic bottles filled with urine, food wrappers, and drawings, hundreds of them, scrawled onto the wood and insulation with pencil and charcoal. Most of them were of a woman, likely Lisa. The man had accessed the crawlspace through a forgotten storage hatch in the basement utility closet. It led up behind the walls of her bedroom, directly to the spot where the breathing had come from. He'd likely been watching her, listening to her sleep. The police never caught him. They said he might have been homeless, or maybe something worse. Someone who had picked her at random, someone who knew to stay hidden. Lisa moved out immediately. She's still in therapy, and she hasn't lived alone ever since this incident. In June 2014, a 28-year-old German man named Lars Matank traveled to Varna, Bulgaria with a group of friends. They were on vacation, enjoying the beach town, the cheap drinks, and the nightlife. Lars was by all accounts a calm, quiet guy. He wasn't someone known to get into fights or cause trouble. But while out one night at a bar, Lars reportedly got into an argument with a group of local men, possibly over a football rivalry. The fight left him with a ruptured eardrum, which meant he couldn't fly home with his friends. The doctor told him he needed to stay behind and let it heal. His friends offered to stay with him, but Lars insisted they return to Germany without him. He claimed he'd be fine, he just needed a few days to rest. Alone in Bulgaria, Lars checked into a cheap hotel near the airport. What happened over the next few days remains one of Europe's most chilling disappearances. Lars began acting strangely. He called his mother several times, sounding panicked. He told her to cancel his credit cards. He said people were following him. At one point, he left the hotel in the middle of the night, claiming he was being watched by 4 mysterious men. He even texted his mom asking what the side effects of an antibiotic he'd been prescribed were. His behavior kept escalating. The hotel staff described him as nervous, pacing, and constantly checking the windows. Then, on July 8th, the day he was scheduled to fly home, Lars arrived at Varna Airport, and things took a dramatic turn. Surveillance footage from the airport shows him walking into the terminal calmly at first, but within minutes, he appears agitated. He's seen speaking to a staff member, then backing away nervously. Suddenly, without any visible trigger, Lars sprints through the terminal, dashes through the automatic doors, and runs at full speed across the airport parking lot, leaving behind his luggage, passport, and all of his belongings. The last known footage of him shows him vanishing into the trees near a construction site. No one has seen him since. His disappearance has become a breeding ground for theories. Some believe he had a psychotic break, potentially brought on by a reaction to an antibiotic he was taking, or a latent mental illness triggered by stress. Others are convinced something more sinister was happening, that Lars was genuinely being followed or targeted, and whatever he encountered in those final moments was terrifying enough to make him run into the wilderness, barefoot and defenseless. There were alleged sightings in Eastern Europe for years after, but nothing ever confirmed. The strangest part is that his mother insists that Lars was not mentally ill. She believes he was in danger, that he may have stumbled upon something he shouldn't have, or gotten involved in something darker than he realized. The image of him running, wide-eyed and desperate, has been viewed millions of times online, yet no one knows what scared him that badly, and no one knows where he went. In 1912, in the small town of Opelousas, Louisiana, 4-year-old Bobby Dunbar disappeared while on a fishing trip with his family near Swayze Lake. His parents claimed he vanished sometime during the day, possibly while wandering near the water. A massive search was launched immediately. Hundreds of volunteers scoured the area, dragging the lake, searching the woods, and even setting off dynamite underwater in case his body was stuck in the lake bed. But Bobby was gone. The town was devastated. For 8 months, his disappearance became a local obsession. Then, in early 1913, a boy matching Bobby's description was found traveling with a man named William Walters, a traveling handyman in Mississippi. Walters claimed the boy was the son of Julia Anderson, a woman who had entrusted the child to his care, but the Dunbars were convinced the boy was Bobby. Walters was arrested for kidnapping. The authorities arranged for a reunion between the boy and Bobby's mother. At first, the boy didn't recognize her. Witnesses later claimed she hesitated, unsure if the boy was actually hers. But after spending a few days with him, she announced to the press and the police that he was, in fact, her son. Case closed, the newspapers said. Bobby Dunbar had been found, Walters was sentenced to prison, the boy was returned to the Dunbar family and raised as their own. But there was a problem. Julia Anderson, the woman who had entrusted the boy to Walters, showed up. She insisted that was her son, Bruce, and that the Dunbars had taken him. She had no money, no lawyer, and no support. When the courts ruled in favor of the Dunbars, she lost custody forever. She returned to Mississippi heartbroken, labeled a liar and an unfit mother by the press. For decades, Bobby Dunbar lived under that name, unaware of any of this. But in the early 2000s, Bobby's grandson began investigating the family's history. Something didn't sit right. Eventually, the family agreed to a DNA test comparing Bobby's descendants to those of the Dunbars. The results shattered a century of belief. The boy who had grown up as Bobby Dunbar was not biologically related to the Dunbars. He was Bruce Anderson. Julia Anderson had been telling the truth all along, which means the real Bobby Dunbar was never found. To this day, no one knows what actually happened to him. Whether he drowned, was abducted, or suffered some unknown fate, his case remains officially unresolved. Meanwhile, an innocent man was imprisoned, and another family raised a child who wasn't theirs, all because the truth was too painful, and the need for closure outweighed the facts. In 1928, 9-year-old Walter Collins disappeared from his home in Los Angeles. His mother, Christine Collins, had given him a few coins to go see a movie while she was working. He never came home. Christine went to the police, who launched a search. His case quickly made headlines. This was during a time of rising fears about crime and child abductions, and public pressure on the LAPD was intense. For 5 months, Christine kept the search alive. She printed flyers, organized searches, gave interviews. Then, in August, police in Illinois picked up a boy who claimed to be Walter. He was brought to Los Angeles to be reunited with Christine in front of reporters. But as the cameras flashed and police beamed with pride, thinking they had solved the case, when Christine saw the boy, she said, "That's not my son." The police told her she was wrong. They insisted he had changed from the trauma. They encouraged her to take him home on a trial basis. Christine reluctantly agreed, likely pressured by the public scene, but after just 3 weeks, she returned to the LAPD and again said, "This is not my son." This time, the police had her committed to a psychiatric hospital, claiming she was hysterical and refusing to accept reality. Meanwhile, the boy admitted that he wasn't Walter. His real name was Arthur Hutchins, a runaway who had been pretending to be Walter Collins to get a free trip to California. He thought it might help him to meet his favorite actors. So that meant the police had publicly reunited a grieving mother with a random child, and then punished her when she didn't go along with the lie. That should have been the end of the story, but it gets darker. Around the same time, a Canadian man named Gordon Northcott was arrested for a string of murders on a chicken farm in Wineville, California. He had lured young boys to his property, imprisoned them, and eventually killed them. When authorities raided the farm, they found evidence linking Northcott to multiple victims. One of those victims they believed was Walter Collins. Christine pleaded for answers, but Northcott never gave a clear confession. He was convicted for other murders, but the fate of Walter Collins remained unresolved. Christine spent the rest of her life trying to find out what happened. She never gave up, and the city of Los Angeles never formally apologized for what they did to her, for locking her away when she refused to accept a lie. The story later inspired the film Changeling with Angelina Jolie, but the real horror is how it actually happened. A grieving mother gaslit by the system, a lost child exploited for headlines, and a police force more interested in good press than truth. In August of 2008, a 24-year-old Canadian woman named Kayla Reed vanished from a small town in British Columbia. She had recently moved back in with her parents after going through a rough breakup and was trying to start over. One evening, she told her mother she was going to meet a friend at a coffee shop nearby. She left around 7:30 p.m. wearing a light hoodie and jeans, carrying her phone but no purse. She never showed up for that meeting. Her phone went dark less than an hour later. What followed was an immediate and massive local search. Flyers went up and volunteers swarmed the forested areas around town. Search dogs found nothing, and there was no sign of foul play. No dropped phone, no torn clothing, no surveillance footage. It seemed Kayla had completely vanished. As expected, her parents were devastated. Kayla was described as responsible and grounded, not the kind of person to run off without telling anyone. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Eventually, the case went cold. But then, a full year later, something happened. Kayla showed up. In the early morning hours of July 5th, 2009, she walked into a hospital nearly 200 miles from where she disappeared. She was disoriented, dehydrated, and barefoot. She was also noticeably thinner, sunburned, and wearing clothes that didn't belong to her. She refused to speak to doctors. She simply wrote her name down on a piece of paper. The hospital staff called police, and after fingerprint confirmation, it was officially her. She had been missing for 11 months. Her parents, of course, rushed to see her, but even then, Kayla said almost nothing. She stared at them blankly, occasionally smiling, but she didn't hug them. When they asked where she had been, she said only, "I was in the dark. I was safe, but it wasn't me." Authorities were baffled. She had no visible injuries or signs of abuse. Toxicology came back clean. She had no head trauma, no signs of having been drugged long-term, no tattoos or branding or anything that would suggest organized abduction. She spent a week in the hospital under psychiatric observation, and then she was quietly released to her family. No charges were filed and no statements were ever made. Kayla never spoke publicly about where she had been. She deleted all her social media accounts and moved away within a year. Reporters tried to follow up, but her family refused all interviews. The case was officially closed, a missing person who returned, but no one ever got the answers they were looking for. Just a young woman who came back from somewhere completely changed. She wasn't hurt or injured, but she was different. One nurse from the hospital said that in her last shift before Kayla was discharged, the girl looked her dead in the eyes and whispered, "Don't go into the woods alone, they find you there." No one knows what she meant, but no one who worked that case ever forgot it. In October 2017, in the city of Santa Rosa, California, a 15-year-old high school student named Connor Hastings disappeared while walking home from school. He took the same route every day, a suburban street surrounded by homes and parks, but one afternoon he didn't show up. His mom called him, but there was no answer. When she checked with friends, no one had seen him since he left school. By 7 p.m., police were notified and a search began immediately. His backpack was found a day later, dumped behind a dumpster a few blocks from his usual route, but his phone was gone. For weeks, the case dominated local headlines. Police dogs tracked a scent trail that ended suddenly at the edge of a wooded trail, where it seemed to just stop. It was strange because no tire tracks were left behind, and there were 0 witnesses. When detectives questioned classmates, rumors began spreading. Some kids claimed Connor had been acting paranoid in the days just before he went missing, like he was jumping at noises and asking people if they'd seen the man in the red jacket. One friend said Connor had recently asked about how to tell if you're being watched. The trail went cold, but 5 minutes later, in March of 2018, Connor returned, or rather, he was found. A 911 call came in from a payphone, one of the few still operating in the area, and the caller reported a teenage boy sitting on a bench, unresponsive, outside a small town library 60 miles away. When police found Connor, he was silent and staring ahead. His hair was much longer than when he'd last been seen, and his clothes were filthy. He had a spiral-bound notebook clutched in both hands, but it was completely blank. He wouldn't speak for over 24 hours. When his parents arrived, he hugged his mother tightly and then burst into tears. But even then, he said very little about where he had been. Over the next few days, he opened up only slightly. He claimed he had been taken by a group, but couldn't describe their faces. He said they kept him somewhere without clocks, somewhere cold. When police asked how he escaped, he said, "They just let me go. I think I passed their test." A month later, he gave one final statement before refusing to speak publicly again. He said, "There were others. I heard them. I wasn't the only one, but I might be the only one they gave back." The notebook he had been holding the night he was found remained empty. No one could get him to write anything in it. But on the final page in the bottom corner, written in shaky pen, were 4 words: "I was not alone." Police never identified any suspects. The FBI reviewed the case, but released no findings. Connor eventually changed schools and now lives under a different name. To this day, his case is officially solved because he came back, but nobody really believes that that's the end of the story. On the night of February 9th, 2004, a 21-year-old nursing student named Maura Murray vanished after a minor car crash on a remote stretch of Route 112 in Haverhill, New Hampshire. Nearly 2 decades later, no one knows where she went, what she was running from, or who might have been waiting for her. Earlier that day, Maura left her dorm at UMass Amherst after sending emails to her professors, telling them there had been a death in the family and she'd be gone for a few days. But no one in her family had died. In fact, no one in her life was planning to leave. She packed a bag, withdrew nearly all the money from her bank account, and bought a few items, including alcohol from a nearby store. Then she drove north into the White Mountains, alone and quietly, without a clear destination. At approximately 7:27 p.m., a local woman called 911 to report a car accident outside her house. A small black Saturn had crashed into a snowbank on a sharp turn. When police arrived 20 minutes later, they found the vehicle, but no sign of the driver. The car was locked and the windshield was cracked. Both airbags had deployed. A box of wine was spilled across the interior. The only thing missing was Maura. A bus driver who lived nearby had seen her just minutes before police arrived. He stopped and spoke to her through the window. She looked cold and shaken but declined help. He drove off and called in the accident, but by the time the officers reached the scene, Maura had vanished. Not just walked away, vanished. Police dogs tracked her scent for about 100 yards up the road, then it stopped abruptly. No footprints in the woods or any belongings left behind. It was like someone picked her up in a car just out of view. Her phone and credit cards were never used again. The bottles of alcohol she had bought, some were gone and some remained in the car. There were no obvious signs of foul play, but nothing added up. She had no history of mental illness. Friends and family said she wasn't suicidal. She was planning for the future. And yet, she was gone. In the years that followed, her case became one of the most obsessively followed mysteries on the internet. Armchair detectives, forums, and podcasters picked apart every detail. Some believed she staged her disappearance to start a new life. Others believed she was abducted by a stranger or someone she arranged to meet. Then there are darker theories. A serial predator operating the mountains, or a cover-up. But nothing concrete ever came, and her body was never found. Something obviously happened to Maura Murray that night. Something that was likely deliberate. And to this day, the forest around Route 112 still holds its secrets. And the most chilling part is if she was taken, whoever did it knew exactly what they were doing and never made a single mistake. In the remote town of Nome, Alaska, a place isolated by hundreds of miles of tundra, accessible mostly by air, people are used to strange things happening. The winters are long and brutal, and the nights seem endless, but even there, among the quiet snow-covered streets and howling wind, the disappearance of Rick Hills in 2004 is something people still whisper about. Not because it was the only one, but because of how it happened and what was left behind. Rick Hills was a 37-year-old electrician, hardworking, quiet, not particularly social, but he was well liked by the people who knew him. He lived alone in a small cabin on the outskirts of town, near the edge of the wilderness. It was not unusual in Nome to be that isolated. Many people preferred it. But Rick's case became more disturbing when it was discovered he wasn't the first one to go missing from that area. In fact, in the 10 years before he vanished, over 20 people had disappeared from Nome under similarly strange circumstances. The FBI would eventually investigate it as a pattern, but Rick's story was different, more personal and terrifying. On November 13, 2004, Rick failed to show up for work. His boss called him repeatedly, to no avail. That evening, a coworker drove to Rick's cabin. His truck was there and the lights were off. It had snowed lightly that afternoon, but when they got closer, they noticed something strange. No footprints in or out of the cabin. It was like Rick had never left or returned. The coworker knocked, but there was no response, so he walked around the property and saw that the back door was open. He called out and stepped inside. The place was undisturbed. The coffee pot was full and his cell phone was on the table, but there was no sign of Rick himself. The weirdest part was the bed was made, not like someone had just gotten out of it. The weird part was that the bed was made so neatly, it looked as though no one had ever been in it. The coworker called the police and they searched the home. Then they searched the surrounding area and then the woods. They brought dogs, drones, helicopters, and still found nothing. Even with the light snowfall, there should have been some sign of direction, like a trail or blood or something, but there was no trace. The man walked out of his cabin with no coat, no boots, no keys, and simply just disappeared. The investigation didn't find foul play. He reportedly had no enemies or debts. Even his bank account was untouched, and his phone had not pinged a tower since the day before. But then, 2 days later, something happened that the public wasn't told about until years later. A hiker about 30 miles north of Nome found something bizarre. A man's sock frozen into the mud of a game trail. Nearby, hidden under a thin layer of snow, was an old Polaroid photograph. It was dirty and crumpled, and its image nearly destroyed by the cold, but the outline was clear. It was Rick's cabin, shot from the woods. The angle showed the living room window, and in the reflection was a face, but it wasn't Rick's. The photo was turned over to the police, but they never released it to the public. Years later, an officer who worked the case anonymously told the local journalist that it was the most disturbing thing he'd ever seen in his career, that the face in the reflection didn't look entirely human. He described it as off, like distorted, pale, the eyes too wide, and the mouth slightly open, as if it had been caught mid-whisper, like someone caught staring who didn't expect to be seen, as he described it. The area was searched again, but nothing was found, and no further signs of Rick. Locals started calling it the Watcher, saying something in the woods had been taking people. The disappearances dated back decades. Natives had legends about the Dark Man, a thing that lived between the trees and came out at night. When the FBI eventually got involved, they said the disappearances were likely due to weather, accidents, and alcohol. But not Rick. People close to the case knew better. They knew it wasn't weather and it wasn't a misadventure. Rick was used to those woods. He wouldn't have wandered out barefoot without a jacket in sub-zero temperatures. He would not have left his door open, and he wouldn't have vanished without a single track in the snow. To this day, Rick Hills has never been found. Some say it was just a tragic accident. Others say Rick saw something he shouldn't have, something that was watching him. On the 22nd of November, 2019, at around 8 p.m., a doorbell camera at a home in Harriet Creek Ranch, Texas, captured footage of a young girl approaching the front door. She was holding a flashlight and looked extremely distressed. She also kept checking behind her, likely to see if someone was following her or not.
Help, please.
Unfortunately for her, the house she approached was empty. The residents were away on vacation, so no one was there to answer. This made her even more panicked as she continued to beg for help.
Please help.
By the time the homeowners noticed the footage, it was already too late. The little girl was long gone, and there were no signs of her anywhere in the neighborhood. But the big question remained: who the girl was, and why she had come to their door in such a frightened state that night. The homeowners didn't recognize her, and she didn't look like any of the neighbors' kids either, so they contacted the police and also uploaded the footage online, hoping the video might reach someone with more information on her. Sadly, it's been 6 years since this footage was captured, and no one has been able to identify the young girl. That said, people online have come up with a few theories that might contain some truth. The more cynical side of the internet believes the girl was nothing more than bait for a group of robbers hiding just outside the camera's view. It's a known tactic where robbers send a scared-looking child or woman to the front door. Out of concern, the homeowner opens the door to help, only for the robbers to appear from hiding and force their way inside. However, this theory doesn't really hold up when you consider just how genuinely distressed the girl sounded. Her voice and the frantic way she knocked seemed too real for a child that age to be faking. The more likely and more tragic theory is that this girl was 9-year-old Serenity Dennard, who had gone missing earlier that year. Serenity had been diagnosed with reactive detachment disorder and disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, which caused emotional instability and frequent attempts to run away. She was admitted to Black Hills Children's Home, a youth treatment facility near Rockerville, South Dakota. Unfortunately, the staff weren't able to keep a proper eye on her, resulting in her running away from the facility on the 3rd of February 2019. A massive search effort involving over 1,200 people was launched, but despite their best efforts, they couldn't find any clues about her whereabouts. The working theory was that she likely ran into the wooded area surrounding the facility, got lost, and succumbed to hyperthermia. However, police didn't rule out foul play. This is where the mysterious doorbell footage comes in. Many speculated that the girl in the video was Serenity, who had gone missing 9 months earlier. It's possible that a kidnapper took her to another state, and after months in captivity, she escaped and tried to ask for help. Though Serenity's family viewed the footage and said the girl wasn't her, many people online still believe it was. Unfortunately, none of the theories were ever confirmed or disproven. Investigators weren't able to find Serenity, and search efforts were officially suspended in early 2021, and the girl in the haunting doorbell video was never identified either, leaving her case an unsolved mystery. On the morning of July 31st, 2022, just before 11 a.m., 22-year-old Allison Duckrow and her mother returned to their home in Sydney, Ohio after breakfast. While making their way inside, an unknown car pulled into their driveway. A second later, the driver approached the front door, 22-year-old James Rail, Allison's ex-boyfriend. The two had broken up over 18 months earlier and hadn't spoken since. The night before, he had sent her a creepy voice note saying he would visit her the next day.
Hi, Allie. It's James. I just wanted to reach out to you because I just wanted to see how you're doing and maybe hear from you if that would be alright, I guess. It's been a while since I've talked to you, and I don't know. I feel like it, I don't know what I feel. I do know that I do want to talk to you, though. I do. It'd be nice. Be sweet. It's probably late right now, but if you want tomorrow, you could probably give me a call. And yeah, it's about it. Please give me a call back. Thank you.
Allison never responded or gave permission, but he showed up anyway. She recognized him through the live camera feed and decided to ignore him. After about 3 minutes, James left the porch, only to circle the house looking for another way in. When that failed, he returned to the front door again and began trying to break his way in. When Allison and her family didn't open the door, he became agitated and started forcing it, with James refusing to stop. Allison's father was left with no choice but to use his firearm, ending the confrontation minutes later. The family had already called the police, but no one could have anticipated the scene that awaited them. Allison and her dad were questioned, and her father later stood trial on August 4th, 2022.
So if you would, I understand, were you aware of the text messages that James had sent your daughter last night?
Was not.
Okay, so your daughter did not share those with you?
No.
Okay.
Thanks to the doorbell camera footage, he was acquitted of all charges on the basis of self-defense. On the night of January 18th, 2025, a homeowner in Carrollton, North Texas received a doorbell notification while out shopping. When she checked the live feed, she saw a mysterious man standing on her porch dressed in all black with a red face and holding what looked like a cardboard box. He moved closer, revealing that he was wearing a red satanic goat mask. He rang the doorbell and then walked away, leaving behind a sign with the words Revelation chapter 20, verses 1 to 15. The verse references the binding of Satan, resurrection, judgment, and eternal torment, making the visit even more disturbing. The homeowner called the police, but since the man hadn't committed a crime, they couldn't do much. As she later said in an interview, I'm scared to leave the house. I'm scared to be at the house. The story was later dropped by the media, and no follow-up information was ever reported. On July 21st, 2023, two elderly women visited the home of their friend, 58-year-old Sharon Gordon, in Dudley, UK. They hadn't heard from her in days, and upon entering, they discovered her lying face down near the stairs, covered in blood. Police arrived quickly and confirmed it was a homicide. Investigators then checked the doorbell footage, which showed the last visitor to Sharon's home, her contractor, Peter Norgrove. He initially claimed Sharon was alive when he left, but footage revealed him leaving with bloodstains on his trousers. Investigators also found the weapon he used in his shed, and he later confessed. Sharon had hired him to build an extension, but after 15 months of delays and poor work, she confronted him. Peter lost his temper and attacked her with a hammer. He later pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life in prison. On October 6, 2024, Kristen Paul was watching TV at her home in Fresno, California, waiting for her husband to return. Just after midnight, the doorbell rang. Assuming it was her husband, she opened the door, only to find an unknown woman with a crazed look. Christine slammed the door shut, but the woman became enraged and began trying to force it open. When that failed, she tried breaking in through a nearby window. Christine called the police while arming herself for protection. Luckily, an officer arrived within minutes and de-escalated the situation.
Hi.
Hi.
You live here?
No, I don't.
So why are you banging on the door?
Because my friend is there.
Despite her erratic behavior, the woman immediately calmed down when confronted by police and was taken into custody. Christine later said she was just thankful the officer wasn't a minute later. On August 12, 2025, the Wilson family was asleep in their home in Midlothian, Texas. At around 1 a.m., 21-year-old Malia noticed a bright flash outside. When she ran downstairs, she saw their front yard engulfed in flames, just inches from the house.
Came halfway down the stairs and I seen this window right here just lit up in flames, and I just ran and got my dad.
She woke her father, who called the fire department. Firefighters arrived within minutes and extinguished the flames before they reached the home. The doorbell camera revealed that someone had poured gasoline around the house and set it on fire before fleeing. The suspect wore a hoodie and mask, concealing their identity. The homeowner, Darrell Wilson, believed the attack was retaliation for a lawsuit he had filed against a former employer. However, police had not caught the arsonist, leaving the family terrified the attacker might return. In the early morning of March 11, 2025, a homeowner in North York, Pennsylvania, was awoken by strange movement on their porch. The footage showed a person wearing a colorful tie-dye cloak and a paper plate mask decorated with jagged teeth and red eyes. They carried a cardboard box, which they placed on the doormat before announcing themselves as the Box Demon.
I am the Box Demon.
A faint lullaby played in the background as they walked away into the darkness. Thankfully, the box was empty. People online later suggested the figure was dressed as Dandy, a Roblox horror character, though the meaning behind the act remains a mystery. In June 2023, the mother of Instagram model Guste Genescate noticed something disturbing in their doorbell footage. An unknown man had been following Guste home and was seen lingering around the house. He looked through the windows and wandered around the property. Terrified, her mother called the police, but they couldn't take action since no crime had been committed. Unable to sleep, Guste set up a rope booby trap in the yard. A week later, the man returned and tripped on it around 2 a.m. When Guste checked the camera, she saw him standing right outside her bedroom window, staring inside. She woke her mother, who banged on the window and scared him away. Another woman in the neighborhood later reported the same man. Despite having a clear image of his face, police were unable to identify him, forcing Guste and her mother to move. As of now, the stalker remains unidentified. Late one night in an Alexandria, Virginia neighborhood, a doorbell camera captured pure horror. Three masked figures in full Halloween costumes stood outside a home at around 10 p.m. and refused to leave. One of the occupants, Shayla, initially thought it was a prank and even greeted them with Happy Halloween. But within seconds, the mood changed. The trio rang the bell, shook the doorknob, and kept knocking, the knocks growing louder and more aggressive.
Open the door! Open the door!
When they couldn't force open the front door, they moved to the backyard, slashed through a wooden fence, smashed a deck screen, and pounded on the windows, taunting the family inside. They threatened to kill the occupants, telling them it's either you coming out or we coming in.
It's either you come out or we coming in!
The ordeal lasted about 6 to 10 minutes before the masked intruders finally left, but not before leaving the family shaken and fearful. The homeowner's daughter later said they were forced into hiding and felt unsafe in their own home.
She just died, so it's just like, I'm just glad I was there. Now she's in fear. She don't want to stay there by herself. It could have been bad. Our Second Amendment right was not used and could have been, like, being very transparent.
Authorities launched a criminal investigation for attempted burglary and criminal threats. It's been a long year since I've done a Ring cameras video, and as it turns out, people are still creeps and a lot of new videos have surfaced, so let's look at some of them. This first video is a very real and grisly reminder that danger can be following you anywhere at any time, even to your front door. And it can be a lesson, especially for women, to be alert of your surroundings, especially before opening your front door. As you just saw, a mother holding her infant daughter unknowingly leads a man to her front door and was mere seconds away from him getting inside. As the man approaches the driveway, you can see him pulling up the mask over his face to conceal his identity, clearly with premeditated intentions. As the man walks up the driveway, the daughter takes notice to him as the mother is still completely oblivious to the approaching threat. Luckily, she makes it inside and shuts the door in time. She only realized what had just happened after looking through the terrifying Ring footage. The woman made a report to the police as soon as she saw the footage, and what the police said was disturbing. There had been a series of reports of a brutal and violent rapist in the area who had been targeting women and children. It's suspected that he and this man were the same person. No sane person leaves their house with a full face mask such as this one if they're not knowingly about to commit a serious crime and want to conceal their identity. The woman in the video just may have saved her and her child's life just by the skin of her teeth. If you're not convinced of just how often this kind of thing happens, here's a similar video. A young college-age looking girl is coming home, letting herself into her house. Not even 5 seconds after she enters the home, two large men step on the porch, and the one in front immediately tries to open the door. Some people think the men looked genuinely confused and may have had the wrong house. However, the short window of time between the girl entering the house and the men stepping on the porch would have definitely allowed them to see the girl. You'd think anyone who just tries to open the door to a house surely must know they have the right house, or at the very least know who lives in the house. It could also be argued that when the man turns to his friend behind him, he's making mention of the camera, and so he pretends to think he has the right house by sticking around and knocking, despite the obvious screams from the girl inside as she notices the men at the door. It seems they only run off after the girl starts screaming, "We're calling the police." So unlike the first video, there's no 100% proof of whether these guys had bad intentions or not. Whether they were trying to grab the girl, or if they genuinely had the wrong house is up for debate, as there's no further info on this video. If it is the second one, still, everything about the men's actions was sketchy. In this video, on the other hand, what's going on couldn't be more clear. In the early morning hours on October 16th in Kent, Washington, a couple's seen returning home. The husband is seen unlocking the door, and seconds later, as the man's wife follows behind, she turns her head to a gun-wielding suspect chasing behind her. She acts quickly and runs inside, locking the front door. The suspect then spots the Ring camera and hits it repeatedly with his gun, effectively breaking the device. It's at this time that you can notice a second man there as well. The couple spent their night at a casino, and for this reason, the wife believes the two men followed them home from the casino hoping to rob them of any of their winnings. Fortunately, they made it inside safely. The suspect with the gun was identified by police as 18-year-old Al-Hussein Drameh, and he was arrested on October 26th. He faced multiple charges, including burglary in the first degree, and he pleaded not guilty to all of them. With this fourth video, we move to something a little more paranormal. This was caught on a TikToker named Nolan Brock's indoor Ring security camera while he was sleeping on the couch. At 1:39 in the morning, he's awoken to the pantry doors opening and some kind of cracks or bangs coming from either inside the pantry or from the doors themselves. With the fan running, the thought of it being a draft wasn't out of the question per se. He ignored it and tried to go back to sleep, but 4 minutes later at 1:43, this happened. One of the doors is aggressively yanked shut, and this officially removes any possibility of a draft being the cause of the doors moving. It's safe to assume he slept in his bed the rest of the night. This next video also comes from inside of a house instead of the front porch, and this one can play on one of the biggest fears of a lot of people, and that is someone lurking around your house as you sleep. In Wichita, Kansas, a family's Ring cameras captured some terrifying video footage of a stranger standing directly over sleeping 15-year-old Anaya Robinson at around 2:30 a.m. on a Friday night. This was the footage captured. Anaya said once she opened her eyes, she felt like she was in a scene from a horror movie, seeing somebody sitting over her, watching her that she didn't know. Anaya rushed to her mother Angel's room, screaming there's somebody in the house, and after being jolted awake, Angel made sure her 2-year-old daughter and Anaya were safe in a room before calling the police. Wichita police responded quickly, but the intruder was already gone. It's likely the boy entered the house simply through the front door. Luckily, the Ring cameras clearly caught his face, and using this footage, the police acted on a tip and were able to arrest a 14-year-old boy whose name was not released. The boy faced aggravated burglary and theft charges. In November 2021, A woman reported on Twitter that a creepy-looking man had been standing outside of her apartment almost every night for an entire month. She included a few of the videos caught by her Ring camera, and it shows the man creepily standing there for extended periods of time, facing her door. At certain points, he can be heard speaking. But what he says is impossible to hear. The woman resorted to posting this on Twitter after her complaints to the police apparently fell on deaf ears. It was a few days after her initial post that she posted an update stating that her friends and family confronted the man, which seemingly got him to stop. Additionally, the post going viral prompted her building security to do an additional routine throughout the night. I can't seem to find her Twitter profile anymore, so there don't appear to be any updates on the matter. And in this last video, an El Paso resident's Ring camera catches what appears at first to be a woman in danger seeking help at their front door in the middle of the night. But this may be a much more sinister situation than that. At first, the woman appears to be in distress, possibly on the run from someone, crying and pleading for help. But things start getting suspicious when she hides anytime a car is approaching. Is she hiding from a specific person chasing after her? Or is she perhaps trying to not be seen from any passerbys? After the neighbor's driveway light turns on, a car's headlights approach from the right, and she's seen casually walking away, presumably to get in that unseen car, perhaps because her driver was growing paranoid that too much attention was being drawn, so they needed to leave. Now you can say that's just a far-fetched theory of mine, but a month later, El Paso police arrested a woman who was charged with burglary of habitation. That woman was Krista Nicole Cordeaux. The woman in the video looks identical to the woman in this mugshot. The charge this woman faced is defined as the act of entering any building illegally with the plan to do something serious, such as harming the owner, damaging property, or stealing. Suddenly, the prospect that this woman could have been trying to trick an unsuspecting person into opening their door doesn't seem so far-fetched. As always, keep your doors locked and be careful who you open them to.